We'll call this City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency meeting in order. And we have a few special guests here tonight. I'm hoping that Cade and Cassandra can help us get started by leading us all in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. All right, first item is changes to the order of the agenda. Jeff, do we have any changes?
Yes, we do this evening, Mr. Mayor. We'd like to pull item 6G off of the consent calendar and move it to the new business calendar. And I think, do we have consultants here this evening, or is it just staff presentation? Okay, so we can take it anywhere on new business at the mayor's discretion.
Very good, thank you. And I'm glad to see we finally had an item under changes to the order of the agenda. It's been a long time. Next item is council communications and announcements. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only have one this time. I'm the liaison to San Carlos Green, and I attended the monthly San Carlos Green meeting where we had a good conversation, mostly focused on ways to implement the city's climate action plan, and there were some good suggestions that were brought forth on potential win-wins where we can get both an energy efficiency reduction and a cost savings at the same time, and I'll be following up with staff about that. We also talked about the drought and some potential ideas for water conservation in the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Cameron. Matt?
I have one item that keeps coming up, and it has to do with a fella, Mr. Miller, Dan Miller, who would like us to hear him out on the issue with the trees. And just for a little background on this, he contacted me, I think it was back in September of last year, thereabouts, asked me to come out and take a look at what the situation was with the trees that were planted by the city between the sidewalk and his, in the planter strip between the curb and the sidewalk in front of his house. And indeed, the trees are lifting up the sidewalk, have ruined it, and also have, he claims, sucked up all the water that he gives to his yard and ruined his yard and caused some other problems. He'd like to see them taken out. So I listened to what he had to say. I went and talked to city staff about it, and thought when I met with the city manager that there was going to be some type of help that could be given to this fella. It turned out that wasn't the case, and then of course I decided to try and bring it to the dais and have it, and so I talked to one council member. I ended up talking to the mayor. He went out and met with Mr. Miller as well. And it just appears to him that he's not going to get any resolution. He would like, and so he sent me an email recently with all this accounting of what's going on, and he asked if he could speak with Cameron, because he's a new council member, and with Mr. Grisilli. And I wrote him back and I said that's impossible for me to set up because I've already played my card, if you will, according to the Brown Act, by talking to Mayor Olberg. But I told him I would give it one more shot in terms of if he wants to be able to have his case presented to the whole council, then what I'm asking is that we give him some time on the agenda at a future meeting to essentially appeal, I guess, what is the decision of the city manager, and to lay his case before us and talk about his specific issue. I know I've brought this up before as more of a general issue regarding those who I feel like got caught in the between of when the city engineer at the time, Mr. McTarry, had the trees planted, and when we changed city policy and gave trees and sidewalks and the responsibility thereof to the homeowners. And I'd still like to do that, but his case specifically keeps coming back. He is sending me emails, and so I'm asking that we simply put this on the agenda, allow him to come to the council, make his case, and speak to everyone.
If I may interject, I just want to make sure I understand. So are you asking that we agendize the topic? Or because he doesn't need our permission to come by and talk to us in public comment?
That's true, but if he comes in public comment, it's not an action item, number one, and he's looking for action by the council, and number two, he only gets 2 minutes, and I don't think he can make his case, given how much time I spent with him when I met with him in September. He can't make that case in 2 minutes.
Okay, no, I understand. So you're asking that we agendize the topic. As we've talked about before, that's the council controls what it puts on its agenda. This particular item, in the more general sense, is something that certainly may come up at the strategic planning meeting in March. But Jeff, what's your perspective on the resource requirement needed to support this discussion, as revised by Matt's comments of a narrower focus?
Right. I think there's probably very little resources just to hear from the resident in question in terms of what the issues are. The larger issue, and it's not that the staff or myself have turned down this situation to remove the trees, is that we don't have the tools at the staff level to make such a decision. We would be essentially violating the city's municipal code if we did that. And so, if you want to put it on and have a discussion with that gentleman, it's pretty straightforward. If you want the staff to weigh in terms of the changes that would be required to the municipal code and the potential costs associated with that, it's a fairly intense activity. Probably take the staff a couple months to do all the research, prep it, and have it ready for an agenda.
All right, fair enough. With that input, again, as per our earlier discussion at our last meeting, we need to have 3 affirmative indications that the council wants to put this on the agenda. Otherwise, it's something that Matt is, certainly welcome to bring up at our next strategic planning meeting. I presume, Matt, you're obviously supportive of doing this, or you wouldn't have suggested it. So are there 2 other council members who want to see us agendize this?
So just a quick question. Did we say it was 3 or did we say it was 2? My recollection was 2.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
you are correct. At our last meeting, we did say that we were going to cut it to 2. Fine.
What I was going to say is I don't think I'm ready to put on the agenda, but I'd love to talk to the guy. So if you can give me his name, I'm happy to reach out to him.
Thank you for that correction, Cameron. So is there one, or did you wanted to indicate?
I was going to echo what Cameron was saying, that I would like to talk to him too.
Okay.
So I think that'd be appropriate.
I would talk to him too, but Mr. City Attorney, are we all going to be able to individually talk to him?
You can individually talk with the gentleman. You just I don't advise more than one of you going at a time.
Right. Okay.
Can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Matt used the term appeal, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily opposed to the idea. I just wonder, since we have rules about officially how we regard what an appeal is, how would we address that if this is an agendized item? Are we actually hearing an appeal that doesn't conform with our normal procedures?
I wouldn't consider it an appeal. I'd consider it an item for consideration. An appeal would come from someone who applied for a tree removal permit. In this case, in my opinion, we don't have such a permit that's been applied for. Mm-hmm. Although we do have an informal request to remove the trees, it's just not our process is a permit process to remove a tree. So I think that's where I would say if we had a permit that was pending, it was denied, and then it worked through our ordinance 1.25 up to the council in that manner.
So this would be agendized potentially as a request?
It'd be a request, and I think the city manager is correct that it's. We'll talk about how to agendize it, but it could be that it's outside of our ordinance procedure because we do have an ordinance that talks about tree removal.
Okay.
I think the first thing is, if I'm correct, I haven't heard anybody else say that they would like to agendize it at this point in time. People have indicated they would like the contact information to talk to Mr. Miller. So perhaps, Jeff, you can make sure that everybody has that. And we can revisit this at a future meeting. Matt, did you have anything else?
No, I don't. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Bob?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think the only meeting that I went to in the last 2 weeks was our, formerly the South Bayside System Authority, which is now the Silicon Valley Clean Water. We changed the name, and that's basically our sewer plant down at Redwood Shores that we share with Redwood City, Belmont, and Menlo Park, Atherton, et cetera. We're still in the midst and the throes of putting in new pipes and a big 48-inch pipe near Bear Island and so on, and proceeding along, nothing really out of the ordinary. We're looking to revise the joint powers agreement that hasn't been really reviewed that much in the last 30 years, and I think it's due for a review. But short of that, things are just proceeding along. So that's the only report I have.
Thank you, Bob.
I just had a comment or a question.
Sure.
Sure.
There were some issues out that way regarding diseased birds and so forth, and they shut down a pond. Do you have any update on that?
A little bit. Well, there were 2 ponds that were in front of the south of the Silicon Valley Clean Water plant, and it was discovered, and that was a terrific place for folks to watch birds, be bird watching, and it's across from if folks know where the dog park is in Redwood City, right down on Radio Road. It was discovered in the last few months that a number of birds had been dying, and when they were, I guess, what is it, necropsy, or is that the word? Or not autopsy?
Basically.
Autopsy.
Yeah, whatever it was. They discovered that there was a strain of avian flu, not dangerous to human beings, but dangerous, very dangerous to birds. And so it was decided to drain those ponds, and they're being drained. They're about 98% drained right now, and there's still a little water there for the birds, but for the most part, to drain them to save the rest of the bird population. That's going to be a situation where they're going to dry out, and then there'll be decisions made whether those are going to be replaced or not replaced.
I don't know if they have any biologists following what's going on out there, but just empirical evidence or comment. I do a fair amount of running and biking out there, and it appears as though those bird populations, because the ponds have been drained, have simply moved to other locations around that area, which could or could not be healthy for them, a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's what it appears, but I just wonder if they have anybody following up on what's going on.
That, I think, would be out of the purview of Silicon
their-
Valley Clean
yeah.
Water. That would be
All
more
right.
of a state fish and game situation, which
Right.
I would assume they're monitoring.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
it was pretty deadly down with those birds down there.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Bob.
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. We had official duties, I guess, included. I'm on the board of HART, and we had a program committee meeting. HART is actually exploring moving away a little bit from their normal investment strategy to.
Mr. Collins, I apologize, but what is HART?
Oh.
I know what it is, but other people have no
thank
idea
you.
what HART is.
Thank you for asking. HART stands for the Housing Equity and Regional Trust, which is a countywide program to invest in below market rate affordable housing projects all around San Mateo County. Thank you, Mr. Griselli, for pointing that out. Anyway, and part of that mission is to explore ways to invest in whatever opportunities come the way of any city in our county. And one of the things that we do is look for ways for HART to enhance its position and also enhance, obviously, housing opportunities. So I attended one of our program committee meetings where HART is exploring becoming more of a partner in an investment up in South San Francisco, and if it's successful, it could actually pave the way for a change in how HART participates in affordable housing projects, which could have implications down the road for San Carlos. On On a less complicated note, I was, and this is not exactly council related, but there were a couple of proclamations in the last couple of weeks. I had the privilege of attending the retirement party for a San Carlos Chamber employee, Kathy Rolfstead, at which also our mayor attended and presented her with a proclamation. I wouldn't normally bring that up, but Kathy has been with the chamber about 12 years, and since I was a member of the chamber board for a number of years and also board president, I can tell you that this woman was extremely dedicated and put in a lot of time, both during hours and off hours, particularly during the Hot Harvest Nights and the Art and Wine Fair. And it was very nice to go to her retirement party, which was at Noelani's, and I know she appreciated the proclamation that Mayor Olbert presented her. And then there was a second proclamation that Mayor Olbert could not attend, and I was very privileged and proud to go to the home of Dick and Miriam Bettinger, who have been married 70 years. It took me all of 45 seconds to drive to their house, which was kind of nice. And we also presented them with a proclamation. It was a remarkable couple. They both all quite there and doing very well, still living in their own home over on Orange. And then finally, just on a kind of a side note, my wife and I took a hike in Eaton Park a week ago. I'd never, my entire life of living in this town, I've never hiked in Eaton Park, and we only hiked part of that trail, but I recommend everybody, if you get an opportunity, to take that hike. There's several new bridges that were built in the last year and a half or so by members of the, and maybe Christine is nodding and she can help me out with the name of the group that built those bridges.
Councilmember Collins, Christine Boland, Parks and Recreation Director. And actually, it was probably they're a member of the Trails Committee, but they're just two individuals who love trails and had some volunteers hauling the wood up there on Volunteer Day, and they built the 4 bridges themselves.
Well, I think we crossed all 4 of them. So, anyway, very well done, and we've only explored probably a tenth of all the trails that are out there for us. Anyway, that's it.
Did you at least remember to check on the status of line 147?
I drove over it.
Oh, well, that's something. I just had one item I wanted to report on this evening. I am our representative on both the City Council Association of Governments Congestion Management and Environmental Quality Subcommittee and of CCAG's main committee itself. And at both of the recent meetings, there's been discussion about trying to improve the capacity of Highway 101 by expanding it. In this particular case, expansion, one of the things that's being talked about might include putting in what's called an express lane. That's basically a toll lane that you can get into legally either by being a carpool or by paying a toll that's whose magnitude is based on how busy the traffic is. Right. Through Fast Track. And very early days, very, very preliminary kind of discussions, not sure where it's going to go, but I did want folks to be aware of it. It would represent somewhat of a change for San Mateo County. Those types of things have been in force and in place successfully in other counties, but not in our area. With that, we will move on to item 4B, staff comments on city administrative business. Jeff.
I have no additional reports this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Nothing happened in the city?
Nothing to report on.
Oh, okay. You're right. That's different. Thank you, Crystal. Next item is public comment. Let's see if I have any. I think all of these slips are for a particular item, so we will not deal with them in general public comment. Persons wishing to address the council on topics not on the agenda are welcome to do so at this point. We ask that you fill out a speaker card. Excuse me, thank you.
all right.
You know, we're going to create a new position called parliamentarian. Guess who the parliamentarian's going to be?
Robert's rules. Yeah.
Yes. No, it's good. Good catch. We actually, Bob reminded me, or pointed out to me I was incorrect. We actually do have one speaker who would like to address us in this non-topic related section. Public comments are limited to about 2 minutes. We do ask you to be respectful of that time, to be respectful of everybody's participation. If you start running over the 2 minutes, I will, as politely as I can, interrupt you to ask you to wrap it up. With that, Mr. Carpio, Andre Carpio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio. I come from Emeryville, and I want to mention first that the hearing assisting device sounds like if the diaphragm in a speaker is loose from the mounting. So it's very difficult to understand what was being said, especially if you don't speak in front of the microphone. I want to finish elaborate on a story I couldn't finish last time, in which the PG&E fire was blown out of proportion and was blamed on the welders and the welds, and because there is a culture in every company to blame the working man. It's a natural tendency. And because of that guilt, that presumption of guilt, then the working man is being blamed for the fire, the weld and the welders. Well, when I made my own investigation, I found something else. What is that? Before the line rupture, there has been a utility company, Hardy and Tatsi of San Francisco, who did excavate underneath the pipeline. And in doing so, they failed to cover the trench they made. And because of that, there was a void underneath the pipe. And as you know, in engineering, a pipe is not made like a bridge. And on plus of that, the pipe is on the bottom of a valley, and with the traffic pounding on the ground there, then it pushes on the pipe, and since you know the engineering of a pipe, the 2 points exposed to the tension are always on top and on the bottom. So the weld has to break, and at this point, it doesn't matter if the pipe was new or old. So the fault, in my opinion, from an engineer, is not the weld or the welder, but it has been created by a condition of having a void under the pipe in which the pipe was subject to stress like a bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpio. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't have any other general speaker cards. If there's anybody else wishing to address us, apparently not. All right. We will move on to item 6, which is approval of the consent calendar. These are items that are normally approved en masse by the council without discussion, although any council member or staff member can request that an item be pulled for specific discussion. We've already had staff ask that we pull off item 6G. Are there any other items that my colleagues would like to pull off the consent calendar? If not, I will entertain a motion for items 6A through F and H.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve on the consent calendar items 6A, B, C, D, E, F, and H.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. Okay, we will move on to item 7. We will deal with the pulled item under new business later. Item 7A is discussing the Transportation and Circulation Commission recommendations on developing the pedestrian master plan. Good evening, Jay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Jay Walter, Public Works Director. And tonight, report to council as it relates to the development of a pedestrian master plan. And one of the things that was the result of our, thank you, there we are, was a result of the September strategic planning session was a request from council to come back for direction, a recommendation as to whether staff should proceed with the development of a pedestrian master plan. So staff's been working on this and over the last couple of months, and so tonight we'll culminate that with our recommendation for you and then for further direction. So all the good reasons for developing a pedestrian master plan is kind of shown on the screen there. For neighborhood quality and mobility enhancement, for the to identify and prioritize pedestrian projects, certainly, to attract grant funding, and as a good planning tool. And so there's the idea that you have a master plan document or reports that would lead you in that direction it's a pretty sound thing to do. So we took this to the Transportation and Circulation Commission at their meeting in January. And we wanted to talk to them about this idea. And so on the slide, it talks about what they considered to be positive values of a pedestrian master plan. And again, it helps set up the planning and standards that the city needs for pedestrian-type projects. It would, in their opinion, it would help to reduce collisions overall involving pedestrians and vehicles with proper improvements that are identified and implemented. It has the benefit of emphasizing walkability improvements for our community. And one of the particular areas they were interested in was fostering education about the need for pedestrian safety and real good sound cooperation with the school district on safe routes to school. So they felt that would be a very important element and value of a pedestrian master plan. However, one of the things that they when we talked about it, that they asked really was, it is a true need right now. Is it something that we want to spend the staff resources on to develop? For the TNC, as a group, back in the September timeframe, they created what we've called a roadmap for those things that they see as staff's priorities for the coming year. We developed that based on the strategic planning objectives that the council had set and other initiatives that the TNC wanted to make sure that we were spending time and resource on. And they felt like at this point in time, the pure development of a pedestrian master plan was not a high priority for them. They were concerned that perhaps it would be a study that could be put on the shelf. That is, we would spend time and resources with a consultant to develop it, and it may be another study that, with the plethora of studies that we have, may not be something that gets our immediate attention and achieves the desired end. They felt it would be important to look for a grant to do this if we were going to move in that direction, and they were certainly very interested. If the council would choose to go in this direction, they wanted to be very much involved in that process. But they felt, again, at this point in time, that it's not for them an extremely high priority to develop the plan, and felt that it was important that we would get a grant to be able to help fund it. So one of the things that I wanted to bring to the council's attention, at least at this point in time, are the current resources that we have available that have already been written, that have been prepared, that deal with pedestrian issues and the subject of pedestrians in our city. Certainly in our general plan, the circulation and scenic highway element, there are policies, and I just brought that with me just to kind of as the idea that we have that in writing, but policies that require us to look for adequate pedestrian and bicycle facility planning as viable transportation alternatives within the city. Also, a policy to provide for safe walking and bicycle riding for transportation and recreation. A policy to support an interconnected system of pedestrian ways, paths, and transit routes within the city and between adjacent communities. And also a policy to support traffic controls that recognize bicycle and pedestrian right-of-way. So our circulation element of the general plan does have a number of measures that would lead us towards pedestrian safety and pedestrian improvements as we consider development projects and other CIP projects going forward. And I think that's an important building block in the planning part of having pedestrian facilities that are emphasized and maximized in our community. Another document is the City of San Carlos Climate Action Plan. And this was done fairly recently. And in the transportation and land use section, there are provisions to actively promote walking and biking as safe modes of local travel, particularly for children attending local schools. Greenhouse gas reduction and other energy savings are associated with those activities, and also to create travel routes that ensure destinations can be reached conveniently by public transit, bicycling, or walking. So we have some good guidance in our climate action plan as well as it relates to pedestrian planning and the importance of pedestrian travel within our community. The city recently, in summer of 2013, we had a traffic safety evaluation that was done by an engineering consultant, and this was something that we did in conjunction with the Transportation and Circulation Commission. And a number of recommendations in that plan were they evaluated intersections all over town. They had pedestrian measures such as installing countdown pedestrian signal indications at signalized intersections and implementing pedestrian-related improvements at selected intersections, which are listed in the document, but in particular at Alameda de los Pulgas and San Carlos Avenue, where they recommended a number of changes for the signing and striping and marking of the pedestrian crossings that are at that intersection. So again, as we've had some of these studies come through, we have had some good pedestrian enhancement projects identified for us to consider. And in one more study, the San Mateo County Office of Education, they did a San Carlos Safe Route to School report. And they recommended pedestrian improvements in and near Britton Acres School and Central Middle School. The ones at Britton Acres, we have implemented a couple of those already. There are a few more. And of course, the Cordilleras Avenue corridor that we'll be talking about later tonight also is mentioned in that report as pedestrian improvements needed. And in and around Central Middle School, we expect that with the school expansion project, there will be a number of those that can be accommodated during the time that construction will take place. And the San Mateo County Comprehensive Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, which was prepared in 2011, it identified 8 pedestrian focus areas in the county, San Carlos being one of those areas, that include downtown areas, the El Camino corridor, where there are major pedestrian barriers that are in place, such as the railroad tracks or the freeway, Highway 101, and safe routes to school for pedestrian and bicycle improvements. So some study done there identifying areas of focus and ways that we can improve our pedestrian passageways. They did a needs analysis and studied pedestrian demand. So that's good information that's available to us in an already done study. And then the last one that I'll let you know of is back in 2010, there was a pedestrian safety assessment that was done here for the city of San Carlos. And they essentially benchmarked key strengths of the city's pedestrian facilities at that time and identified some areas for improvement to be considered. And so the city would have a number of ideas that could be used in grant applications going forward, CIP projects, or other things to enhance our pedestrian safety. And in fact, during that the time of that study, there was a pedestrian walking audit that was done for several routes in town that had some suggested improvements too. So I guess what I'd like to conclude with, at least at this point, is at this time, staff believes that spending the extra resources to hire a consultant and do a pedestrian master plan may not be necessary based on the number of studies that have already been done. So I wanted to just kind of open it to council questions at this point in time and potentially some further direction. And if so, council could direct us to have a CIP project which could come forward, and we could have that be funded in the next round of projects if council felt it was very important.
Thank you, Jay. Questions for staff? Cameron.
Hi, Jay. So I'm a little confused. So the T&C thinks it's not a priority. Staff thinks we've already got it covered from a report perspective. So what was the motivation for having this discussion? Was it that a previous council asked for a pedestrian plan, or?
This came out of the strategic planning retreat that we had in
I see.
September.
I got it.
With council and prior to you coming on board on council, and that was one of the things that they wanted to bring back to council for further discussion.
Okay. Well, I mean, your presentation makes perfect sense to me. If we have projects identified in all these various studies, and if the Transportation Commission is not motivated to take it up, and if it costs money to hire a consultant, it sounds like it's not the right thing to do.
Matt?
Just a comment. And I guess the TNC and staff could take a look at this, but whenever the city applies to the CCAG subcommittee of BPAC, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, one of the scoring criteria is whether or not the project that's submitting for funding is part of a master plan. And so it does affect the scoring. It may be, you can take a look at that, though. It may be small potatoes compared to the dollars spent to put together a plan. But I think it's worth taking a look at.
Okay, and one of the things that I did try to find is, as far as funding goes, and I didn't get to that at this point. That's the slide I should have added, but there are some grant programs available. Based on my research of those grant programs at this point in time, for us to qualify for pedestrian-type projects, we don't necessarily have to have a pedestrian master plan in place, but we can use our bicycle transportation plan and these other documents which have been prepared that give us the kind of the essentially they identify for us those things that we want to do according to the plans we have in place. So.
Questions for staff? I had one, Jay. We have master plans for a number of other areas. I mean, one that comes to mind immediately is, as I see you talking to us, is the sewer system master plan. Why do we have master plans in those areas?
The sewer system master plan in particular was largely based on a condition assessment of our sewer system so that we could identify which locations and sections of the pipelines needed to be updated and improved. One of the important parts of that is because all of those facilities virtually are underground, they're less obvious as to the need for rehabilitation or replacement. And because it's an ongoing program of rehabilitation and replacement, we want to be sure that we have a good condition assessment going forward so that we can prioritize those projects. I think the pedestrian projects in particular would be a little more obvious. In part, they would be based on some of the problem areas that folks report to us, also some of the collision locations if we had a problem that way. So I think they're a little easier to prioritize compared to something like an underground sewer system.
I guess I understand that, but I think it still sounds to me like that's only part of the reason we have one, or part of the reason you have a master plan. Part of it is also just to make sure that it keeps coming up in the competition for resources, and that there's a planned approach to it as opposed to a reactive approach. Okay, and not everything can be planned. I get that, and I'm not necessarily terribly crazy about hiring yet another consultant to come up with yet another plan. But I guess what I am a little concerned about is how do we end up having a planned, thoughtful approach to dealing with pedestrian-related traffic issues in the town if we don't have a master plan. It seems to me the master plan is the framework that staff tends to rely on to do that kind of forward-looking scheduling of stuff. Is there an alternative to that? I know you pointed out all these documents exist, but on the other hand, a number of the things that we did last year and over the last couple of years, as you talked about, were things that came in over the transom. Somebody came to us and said, hey, there's a problem here. We said, oh, okay, we'll fix that. There wasn't really a planned thing.
Well, I think the way I would respond to that in terms of being able to plan out for all pedestrian improvements, I think to a degree the city's built out and we have a fair amount of infrastructure, and so identifying those areas are important. I do think that we've had enough of the studies to indicate to us where some of our problem areas are, so that as we would need to prioritize the funding that can be made available, I think we have some good information already. So again, I think my primary recommendation is based on the fact that I don't think we need to pay a consultant to come in and tell us where a lot of this needs to be done. I believe we can have staff go through these documents and then come up with the prioritized lists that we need for the pedestrian improvements that we need.
Actually, that last element, I would be very happy to see us do that. I mean, that's kind of my point about, I don't necessarily want to hire another consultant to go through and do it, but I also don't want the reports to just sit around to not compete for the scarce resources. Any other comments or questions? Staff feels they have what direction they need or whatever they're looking for from council?
Yes.
Thank you, Jake. We will move to item 7B, which is an update on the PG&E natural gas line 147. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Jeff Maltby, City Manager. This will be a very quick update tonight. Very little has transpired since the last council meeting where I reported out on this. The mayor and I will be meeting tomorrow with Chris Johns, the president of PG&E, and we're hopeful that we're getting close to a mutually agreed solution to the problems that we've had on line 147. In addition to that, we're also setting up meetings up at the CPUC to do ex parte meetings with commissioners and staff members to continue our dialogue on line 147. We're anticipating that those meetings, if necessary, would take place sometime in mid-March. I think we'll have a much more robust report for you at our next council meeting that may or may not include a closed session report as well from our city attorney. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Jeff?
Thank you.
None? Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we will move on to unfinished business, item 8. We have one item there, consideration of adopting ordinance number 1473, amending San Carlos Municipal Code Section 10.32.220, parking, 3-hour, Loreola Park.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Christine Boland, Parks and Recreation Director. This is our second reading, proposed second reading of the ordinance presented on February 10th. This ordinance would impose a 3-hour parking limit at Loreola Park, weekdays and Saturdays, excluding Sundays and holidays. Hours would be 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Questions for Christine? Seeing none, do we have, I will entertain a motion on the item.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt ordinance number 1473, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending San Carlos Municipal Code Section 10.32.220, parking, 3-hour, Loreola Park.
Second.
We had a photo finish there.
I think so.
Want us to do that in slow-mo? So you can...
We have to go to the tape. Before we move on to see if there's any discussion, is there anybody among the audience who wishes to address the council on this item? Seeing none, any discussion? Seeing no call for discussion, the roll, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. Now that brings us to new business. First item on new business is item A, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the Cordilleras Avenue traffic improvements.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the Commission. My name is Matt Lee, City Engineer. Today I have with me the City Attorney, the Sheriff's Office Captain, and the Battalion Chief of the Fire Department to answer any additional questions you may have after this discussion. What we have before Council tonight is a recommendation from staff for Council to adopt the resolution approving the Cordilleras Avenue traffic improvements. But before we get into the discussion of the corridor and the improvements themselves, I would like to take a step back and discuss the entire Corlaris Avenue corridor, and then go back in and focus on the segment between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth, and then the intersection at Elizabeth and Cordilleras. The Cordilleras corridor is a two-lane north-south collector street that is one of two north-south collector streets between Alameda de los Pogos and El Camino Real. It serves as a collector street and is designated as such in the 2030 general plan. It's approximately three-quarters of a mile long and has an approximate average daily traffic volume of 2,700 vehicles per day. The corridor itself, when you take a look at the cross sections, can be easily split up into three segments. The first segment to the north is San Carlos Avenue to Elizabeth. It consists of no parking on either side of the street, an 8-foot striped shoulder, which is currently being used as a pedestrian path, and what amounts to two 12-foot lanes. In the middle of Cordilleras Avenue, there is approximately, there's this location between Elizabeth and Bell where there's two parking on both sides and what amounts to two 7-foot travel lanes. And then further to the south, there's the section between Bell Avenue and Britton Avenue, which has parking on both sides and travel lanes approximating about 10 feet. The 85th percentile speed, which is typically used to determine the speed limits for the corridor, range from 29 miles an hour to 27 miles an hour along the corridor in those locations. The slower 85th percentile speed is generally to the south. There's been approximately 8 accidents in that corridor within 5 years, with the majority of the accidents happening in the middle and southern segments of that corridor. Cordilleras Avenue itself, as suggested by Director Walter, is part of the Britton Acres Elementary School Walk-on Roll to School suggested routes, which is essentially a quote-unquote safe routes to school, designated safe routes to school. As indicated previously, there is a portion of Cordilleras where there are no sidewalks, and that's between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth Street. Looking at the data for the corridor itself, the data indicates that there's no significant speeding along that corridor, and there's no accident concentration within any portion of that corridor. The corridor functions as is classified as a collector, and the speed limits in that area indicates that the street is properly signed for 25 miles an hour. At the last council meeting, it was suggested that staff take a look at the entire corridor to see if there were any improvements that could be done to bring Cordilleras up to collector standards. Staff took a look at that, and what it essentially would amount to, our city standard would require that there'd be approximately parking on both sides of the streets and 11-foot lanes throughout the entire corridor. Now, what that would require would be acquiring right-of-way, possibly removing encroachments of frontage of the yards and people's property, filling in sidewalk gaps. This would be a significant cost, which can cause a significant reconfiguration of the streets. And with the increase in width of the travel lanes, it could potentially increase the 85th percentile speed along that corridor, which is counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here. Now that we've talked about the entire corridor, I would like to focus on the segment of concern itself. On November 19th, 2013, there was a letter sent from the neighborhood group on Cordilleras between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth. They cited concerns of speeding in the area, pedestrian safety, the striped path being too close to vehicular traffic, and an unsafe pedestrian crossing at the intersection of Elizabeth. The segment data seem to indicate a majority of the items that we initially mentioned, but when looking at the data itself, the average speed along that corridor in that segment is 22 miles per hour. Out of the 12,000 vehicles that were logged during the traffic count, approximately 60 of them were speeding over 35 miles an hour. If you equate that to a percentage, that's essentially 0.5% of the vehicles counted were going 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limits. In that segment itself, there's only been one accident in the past 5 years. And in the past, as a traffic calming measure, 2 bulb outs were installed in that segment to reduce the speed at that segment. And as indicated in the past, there's no sidewalk there. It's just a striped shoulder. As for the segment analysis for that particular segment, although there's no speeding along the corridor, staff felt that traffic calming was still desired in this location, mainly due to the fact that there is an unprotected sidewalk at that location, and it is a designated walk and roll to school route by the school district. One of staff's main goals for traffic calming is to reduce the speeds that would be acceptable to the neighborhood, but not to a point where it would be a restriction, where it would divert traffic onto other streets, or not to be inconsistent with the desired function of that street. As for the concepts that the staff came up with for the corridor itself, we came up with two. The first one is a speed hump. Speed humps are essentially a raised pavement area that controls speeds for purposes conforming to engineering specifications. This is slightly different than a speed hump, which is something you normally see in parking lots, which is a lot more higher and a little shorter. These are a little shorter and a little longer. And what that does is it does not require the vehicles to completely slow down to get over those bumps comfortably, but it will require them to slow down to a specific speed that would be acceptable for the posted speed limits. An example of one would be on Edgewood Road as you get off of Alameda de los Pogas heading east. This location is cited because of conversations with the fire department. They've indicated that although there are concerns with the speed humps reducing response times, they've cited Redwood City speed humps as ones that would be least impactful to their fire rigs. The second alternative would be the road narrowing concept. As you take a look here, this is Corvallis Avenue heading right to left, northbound heading to the right, and Elizabeth Street at the intersection. As discussed earlier, there are 12-foot travel lanes, no parking, and an 8-foot striped sidewalk at that location. However, to the south, there's parking on both sides and approximately 7-foot travel lanes. The concept came about mainly due to the fact that there is a big discrepancy between the travel widths south of Elizabeth versus north of Elizabeth. And that was one of the assumptions of why there may possibly be speeding in the area itself. Staff came up with the concept of including parking in the area to narrow the lanes down for vehicles. So the parking itself would serve two purposes: to protect the pedestrians from the striped path away from the vehicles themselves, and to narrow the travel path down itself so vehicles would slow down as they go through the area. One of the concerns is that the neighborhood understood that as you narrow the travelway itself, there may be a propensity for more sideswipe accidents. And in order for this concept to work, you would have to constantly have vehicles parked out there a majority of the time. So after discussions with the neighborhood themselves and the other stakeholders such as the Sheriff's Office and Public Safety, staff recommends the concept of installing 2 speed humps between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth. The speed humps themselves are not as restrictive as speed bumps. They're an acceptable method of speed control. They have neighborhood concurrence. It's a Traffic and Circulation Commission recommendation, and it's acceptable to public safety. Next, we're going to head into the intersection of Elizabeth and Corvallis, but before we get there, I would like to take an aside and to explain stop signs themselves. Stop signs are a traffic control device applied where normal right-of-way application rule is insufficient to ensure safety. The stop signs are used to assign right-of-way, and their criteria set as such that they can only be installed when there are certain traffic volumes, sight distance, intersection geometrics, or safety concerns that can warrant those stop signs. The California MUTCD, which is the standard that we abide by for many traffic control devices, says that it explicitly indicates that stop signs should not be used to reduce speeds.
Matt, what's MUTCD?
MUTCD is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices.
Thank you.
Always, in 2011, an always stop analysis was performed at that intersection, and it was determined that all-way stop control was not warranted. Given the concerns in the later half of last year, staff decided to initiate an additional all-warrant stop analysis to consider conditions readily not apparent in the initial analysis to see if there was any way to justify a stop sign at that location. What the traffic engineer TJKM came up with is they tried to look to see if there was enough volumes on the side streets to warrant a stop sign. Unfortunately, the volumes were too low in that area. They tried to take a look at the pedestrian volumes, and the peak hour volume only amounted to about 17 pedestrians per hour, and there were no collisions related to a failure to yield at that location, and there were no other unusual factors that could have warranted a stop sign in that area. And so the conclusion, again, came to the fact that an all-way stop sign at that intersection was not warranted. The engineering considerations for installing an unwarranted stop sign should be considered when deciding if we want to move forward with that approach. A multi-way stop sign is actually unsuccessful at controlling speeds. There have been many studies, before and after studies, indicating that speeds are not actually reduced when a stop sign is placed in. And in certain instances, stop signs sometimes increase speeds at the mid-block locations of segments of road due to the fact that drivers feel the need to have to make up time for unwarranted stops. Unwarranted multi-way stops also have propensity to have poor compliance when drivers realize that the stop sign, or when they feel that the stop signs are unwarranted, they tend to roll those stop signs. There's also, because of the fact that they roll the stop signs, there also is a decrease in pedestrian safety because of the noncompliance. And as a nuisance, sometimes there's an increase in noise in the vicinity of the intersection when vehicles stop. Other considerations that we would like to consider would be law enforcement. There are enforcement concerns which Captain Rothfuss can answer any questions that you guys have. Battalion Chief O'Leary can talk about the response time concerns at stop signs themselves, and City Attorney Rubens can also discuss the legal considerations for installing a stop sign when it's not warranted. For that intersection, staff actually took a look at 4 different alternatives themselves. The first 2 were rectangular rapid flashing beacons and in-roadway flashing lights. These were essentially items that can be used to notify drivers that pedestrians were actually in the crosswalk area using a visual cue. The staff would like to reserve these instances for when pedestrian volumes are actually high enough to be utilized in this area, as to not dilute these types of traffic calming measures throughout the city. The next item would be a raised crosswalk, which is essentially a speed hump with a flat top on it. The flat area would be essentially the crosswalk itself. Staff felt that this would be something that would be appropriate within a school area because it actually elevates the crosswalk slightly for children as they cross the street. And it also serves as a speed hump, so vehicles would slow down as they come through the area, and it would help with yielding crossing the intersection. The fourth and final alternative is the all-way stop control, which we discussed a little earlier about the warrants on what the concerns may be in that area. After the discussion with all the stakeholders involved, staff recommends installing a raised crosswalk at the Elizabeth intersection. We feel that it addresses the neighborhood speeding concern, increases yielding to pedestrians, is an appropriate design near the schools, and however, it's not a neighborhood preference, but it is a TNC recommendation. So before council tonight, staff's recommendation would be that council adopt a resolution approving the traffic improvements along Cordilleras between Elizabeth and San Carlos Avenue, which includes 2 speed humps and 1 raised crosswalks. I now leave it open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Matt. Questions?
Yeah, I've got
Matt?
a couple. First question I have is if there was any consideration given to just simple striping. When I made the comments I did about the inconsistency of the corridor from San Carlos Avenue to Britain, one of the things I had in mind is what you pointed out. I figured this was the case, but didn't study it the way you guys have, is that the travel lanes change in width as you go along. So was there any consideration to just simply adding some striping like you see along roadways, either in, I guess what would be appropriate would be a white stripe, just to give a consistent corridor with that the cars travel from one end to the other?
Yes, there was consideration for that. So that's why the two concepts fell into concepts, came up as concepts for the segment itself. One of the reasons was the striping concept was very similar to providing parked cars in the area. In our discussion in developing these concepts at the TNC, it was discussed that, striping is just striping and it was not a physical barrier. So the concern was if we were to do some type of narrowing, we would look at using something a little more than just incremental striping, and creating an actual barrier to protect the pedestrians on that striped path.
A follow-up on that, then, when the discussion was taking place about striping versus, I guess, what you came up with was parking, and even with the speed hump issue, I know there's a couple of people on there, Margaret Pye being one, who's usually pretty aware of cycling issues. Any comments from her or anybody else about the issues of cyclists versus these?
The cyclists' concern were more over speed bumps. Those are ones that you see mostly in the parking lots, where they're a little more shorter and higher. That's what was their concerns. They felt that with these speed humps, because of the length of them, bicyclists can go over them easily without as much discomfort as they would with speed bumps. And that's why these were one of the concepts that were selected.
And two things. With the speed humps that you're talking about, I'd be curious where exactly you're talking about locating those, and number one. And number two, would they include I don't know what the proper term is, but the ones that are on just off of Edgewood, I think the ones that you're talking about, I don't know what the name of that street is, but it's in Redwood City, and it comes down from the school and ends up pretty close to the LDS church where it exits, and there's a stoplight there. But that street has, I think, 2 speed humps along the way, and there's about an 18-inch section in the speed hump that a cyclist can go through and not have to even worry about the speed hump.
That could be something we would consider as we go further in our design of the speed humps themselves. However, the Redwood City standards do not have any provisions for any types of cutouts. And
is that unincorporated there then, or I don't know?
I'm not actually sure the area that you're referencing, but the area on Edgewood, I believe, is within the city of Redwood City's city limits.
Because there definitely is.
There's a middle. There's a dip.
Yeah. So at the discussion at the TNC Commission meeting, it was determined that the speed humps weren't as invasive to bicyclists as speed bumps were, so those may not be necessary. Having a cutout may not be necessary.
No,
what the
I'll
cutout
have some
does is-
comment about that when we discuss it, but thank you. Okay, so to the question of where exactly are you thinking of putting these in?
So staff was going to go back and work with the community and take a look at the entire segment between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth to see which would be the best location to put these 2 speed humps.
Bob?
So, Matt, you're basically talking about 2?
Yes.
So you're an engineer, I don't have that expertise. Do you think they need to be, I'm thinking that they may be south of the bulb outs, you know what I'm talking about? The bulb outs that are there?
Yes.
They'd be between the bulb outs and Elizabeth, or you think one might, and again, I apologize, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you think is it beneficial to put one there and one on the other side of the bulb outs, or do you think they'd be together or a little closer?
We would have to evaluate that, just taking a look at the corridor itself. I mean, there's been an idea tossed around of having it work in conjunction with the bulb outs, so it actually being in the location where the bulb outs are themselves.
Okay.
But we have not yet settled on a location, so.
But you do, but the Traffic and Circulation Commission discussed it, and staff is recommending just 2? It's a fairly long spot. That's why I was wondering. And again, having driven that thing a million times, you come up, and of course you don't always, but I do slow down when you come to those bulb outs, and then it would seem, if you're going, let's say, south, and then it would seem like then the bumps would be efficient going the other way. If you put them in the bulb outs or before the bulb outs, I don't know that it does much. I don't know what good it would do. And again, unless you're going to do additional ones, why would there be 2 and not 3 or 4, let's say? Because I've been on streets like the one Matt talks about in Redwood City. They have more than 2. It's Cordilleras, actually.
Oh, is
believe
it?
it or not, it's Cordilleras. They have more than 2. I think they have 4 at least. And I've been into streets in Orinda that have 4 or 5. It was 2 some magic number, or?
So there's a set spacing that these can be set to. As for other jurisdictions, I can't really speak to those, but what we're trying to avoid, again, is to restrict Cordilleras to such a point that it would divert traffic onto other streets because it's functioning as a
That's a reasonable
collector.
thought.
And
So you might want to make the humps there, but not necessarily so many people are going to go, I'm not driving that street, I'm going off on other streets, and then we have issues in others.
Understood. Our goal is to reduce the speeds to a point where it would be comfortable for the neighborhood.
Again, I'm not an engineer, but it would seem to me, and again, this is just intuitive, and I may be wrong because I'm not an engineer, that maybe south of the bulbs might get you most bang for your buck, but I'll let you guys talk about that.
I'll take note of that.
Cameron?
Hey, Matt.
Hey.
You cited in your presentation average numbers for number of cars per day, et cetera. But it seems to me, the concern of the neighborhood is really at peak times. And so I just want to make sure, I was looking at the Warren analysis, and the Warren analysis says that a stop sign is warranted if, excuse me, if traffic exceeds 300 vehicles per hour. Is that right?
Yes, for one of the warrants, yes.
For an 8-hour period.
Yeah.
And then it says, well, there was one peak hour from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. of 336 vehicles per hour. So during the time at which we see the most pedestrian traffic and where the concentration of the concern is, that indeed exceeds the threshold for a stop sign. It's just that level of traffic doesn't keep up all day. Is that the best way to think about it?
I think the best way to think about it is the threshold is actually for 8 hours. So you would have to look at a day. Just because there's one spike in that instance doesn't mean that criteria is...
Even if that's the time when, all the kids are walking to school and when there's the major concern, that's not really taken into account.
I think the installation of a stop sign itself, because the stop sign is a permanent installation traffic control device, they want to make sure that it's warranted for a majority of the time in that location. That's why there's the 8-hour. For instances where there's this spike, like you're suggesting, around school times, the thought process is to probably utilize traffic calming devices to accommodate it for those peak hours. Something that could be along the lines of whether it's a crossing guard or some other traffic calming measure.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask about the Warren analysis, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, which is said there was observation, there was only 17 pedestrians per hour. Now, presumably, if a stop sign was put in place, there would be many more pedestrians who would feel safe enough to cross. Is that sort of taken into account what the potential demand is for that intersection versus, people who are, looking at alternate roundabout routes because they're worried about, potentially getting in the mix of traffic?
I think these standards have, before they get put in the MUTCD, they kind of work their way through the profession, and there's many discussions on it. My assumption would be that it already is taken into account. That's why they have these set criteria. So there's not to say if the stop sign is there, it wouldn't be utilized more, but it wouldn't be utilized to a point where it would all of a sudden justify that criteria.
Okay. And then one last question. I know there was a lot of discussion about speed and that stop signs aren't a good mechanism to reduce speed. I think the concern, as I've heard it articulated from the neighborhood and from the parents in that area, is not speed per se on long stretches of Cordilleras. It's more the danger of the transit of that particular intersection. And the question I have is, maybe speed humps are a good way to get people down from 29 miles an hour to 21 miles an hour or something, but how do you think about the safety of an intersection? And shouldn't we believe that having a stop sign where drivers come to a full stop is the safest way to protect people when they're crossing an intersection?
I would say that, yes, that would be the case. However, at unwarranted stop signs, sometimes they do not stop or they roll the stop sign. I believe that the safety at that intersection was actually looked at in the always stop warrant analysis. They looked at the volumes. There were no real accident concentrations in the area. I think there was only one accident along the segment itself, and there was really no accidents due to yielding at that location, at that intersection. So if we're looking at safety from an engineering perspective, it was not deemed an issue.
Okay. Thanks.
Ron?
Thank you,
He's
Mr.
scribbling away, so I figure you must have a few.
I have a few. Thank you, Matt. Nice presentation. A lot more detail than I expected, but a lot of good detail. So I noticed that you've got a couple recommendations with the raising the sidewalks and putting the speed humps, but
Raising the crosswalk.
excuse me, it's crosswalk. One of the things that kind of jumped out
Not going to raise the sidewalk.
was this rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which is one of the options that is considered. And I think you said something about the staff wanted to wait until there maybe was an increase in traffic for that. Was that your comment?
Yeah, so what we usually try to do is the more these rectangular rapid flashing beacons are highly effective because of the fact that they're not utilized as much, and they're utilized at strategic locations. And they're effective in the sense that people don't go through, they're not just diluted throughout town. And so what staff tries to do with these devices is try to reserve them for locations where there is a high enough pedestrian volume for them. An example would be for the in-road crosswalks going along San Carlos Avenue at Arundel School, where people are crossing those locations. And so at this area, staff felt that the raised crosswalk would be a good incremental approach at this time to put it at that location. And rapid flashing beacon could be explored later if there was still a concern after that traffic calming measure was installed.
Is there a cost consideration in there too? It's cheaper to put in a raised crosswalk than putting in the...
Yeah, there was cost considerations as well. It just depends on the location themselves. These rectangular rapid flashing beacons could be relatively cheap if you install them with solar panels. However, depending on the movement of the sun and if there's any trees in the way, those signs themselves may not be operational 100% of the time because they can't retain that power. You would have to hardwire them. And if we go and hardwire these signs in, there could be significant cost because we would have to determine where the power is going to come from. And so there could be a long stretch of conduit where we connect to a PG&E pole itself. An example is, again, on San Carlos Avenue at Arundel, those speed radar signs were initially a solar panel, and they did not work a majority of the time. And so they were hardwired as part of the Safe Routes to School project at Arundel this past summer.
Okay. Well, I guess the thing that kind of jumped out at me was that in this multi-way warrant analysis, there was a paragraph that said a study found that going from a no beacon arrangement to a two beacon system mounted on a supplementing warning sign on the right side of the road, rock crossing increased yielding from 18% to 81%. That's a pretty big number. And it just seems to me that if one device has that much of an effect, that it's something that we ought to take a closer look at. I don't know how anybody else feels, but it's just something that was, it jumped out at me more than the in-roadway flashing lights, which I know are placed at various places around around town and around other cities on the peninsula. And I hadn't even thought about the, flashing lights on a pole, but when I see a number like that, am I missing something that maybe there's not as significant?
No, I think there is some significance to that. And again, I think it's the fact that those signs are used sparingly at strategic locations. And it's really dependent on I believe, the pedestrian volume or crossing at those locations. And staff did take a look at it, and the pedestrian volume, the peak hour volume was 17 pedestrians an hour, and that was only on the west leg of Elizabeth, which is, there's already a stop sign there. So even at the peak hour count, the legs crossing Cordilleras don't even have a high enough volume as the ones on Elizabeth.
Okay. I had a discussion with a resident over the weekend, and one of the concerns was that, those things flashing could flash into people's living rooms and kitchens and things like
Yes,
that.
that light intrusion is.
Are they constructed such that they could be on a timer, that they would only work certain times of the day? Say during only daylight hours, or even more appropriately during school hours?
So those devices, I would have to check, but those devices are typically pedestrian actuated. So there's sometimes a push button, or there's ones that are sensors. When you just cross the crosswalk, there's a sensor that feels it, and it just kicks the lights on. That's not to say that there isn't some manufacturer out there that has it so it's set on a specific time of day, but I think typically those devices are meant to just be operational whenever they're actuated by a pedestrian.
Okay, and then there was the whole liability issue of putting in a four-way stop sign, and I noticed that it mentions that obviously let me just find it, because there was some language here that said it was I have one more after that, but it basically said that the cities would increase liability if there's an accident, et cetera, et cetera. Where does that liability come from? Does it come from the person who's speeding and breaking the law and consequently hits somebody or injures somebody or that sort of thing? I mean, what recourse do they have if they've broken the law? I know maybe it's a naive question, but it's been on the minds of.
I think that's actually a good question. It's a perfect question for City Attorney Rubens to answer.
I can answer it now or later after Matt's question.
All right.
If the council's
maybe.
preference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we can answer it later. And then I think the last question I had was, what are psychoperceptive pavement markings? I didn't get a sense of exactly what those are.
There are things you see when you're taking something you're not supposed to and being on the road at the same time.
Where is that?
The psychoperceptive pavement markings are something that make you feel like you're possibly traveling faster than you can. So there are certain traffic calming measures where they've indicated that they create horizontal striped lines perpendicular to the path of travel, and they increase or they decrease the distance between them as you approach a certain location. So when you're driving fast, the lines look wider apart, but even though you're driving the same speed, as you get closer, it looks like you're speeding up. And so at that time, it makes it feel like you're going faster, and therefore the theory is that people sometimes may slow down.
All right. I think my questions are answered for now.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I had a couple I wanted to throw in the mix as well. I'm a little unclear about why we aren't considering including on-street parking on at least one side or the other of that's the northernmost stretch of Cordilleras. I read the response or the summary of responses staff provided from the neighborhood discussions, and I certainly understand the concerns about it would only work if cars are actually parked there, and there's a concern about vehicles being sideswiped and whatnot, all of which are realistic concerns. But on the other hand, I don't really see what the downside to it is. It's almost like follow on to the question that Matt had asked earlier is why not just stripe the street? So why not just stripe the street and arrange it to have parking? And if nobody wants to park there, well, that's fine. But if they do, then we get the benefit of the cars parking there in terms of a calming measure.
So one of the downsides is that introducing parking in that location would make the street, would make it substandard itself, because the lanes itself should be 11 feet for a collector, 11 feet wide for a collector. And so although we're not creating that situation, we're just reintroducing parking back, there is a risk involved with going with that narrowing concept.
But I thought the middle and southern stretches already were narrowed.
Yeah, and that's because they are substandard. However, those streets were built in the 50s, and so they're essentially grandfathered in. I mean, just because they're substandard now does not mean that we can't
I
still
see.
use
So
them.
they were built as a collector to the standards in the 50s, but that's not the standard today.
I don't think they may not have even been built as a collector in the 50s. They were built just based on the volumes and anticipated growth in that area. Over time, through our general plan, we've designated Cordilleras itself as a collector, just based on the configuration of the street itself. So we may have dedicated it as a collector.
Okay.
in lieu of that.
Well, we could certainly go back and discuss that later during council discussion. That certainly answers the question. Thank you. Next question I had is, what's the cost to install a sidewalk on that, just on that stretch of the road where there is no sidewalk currently?
We took a quick planning number estimate, and it was just installation of sidewalk itself was approximately $100,000. That's not considering drainage or relocation of other facilities.
And that would be on just one side of the road?
Yeah, that would be on one side of the road between San Carlos Avenue and Elizabeth.
Got it. Okay. And presumably, based on your earlier comments, if we were to install this, well, actually, if we installed the sidewalk on just one side, would that force the street to be substandard at that point?
No, because currently there's width right there right now for that sidewalk. That 8-foot stripe path still allows for 12-foot lanes in both directions.
Would a sidewalk act as a material traffic calming measure by itself, or is it?
Not necessarily. It would separate the pedestrians from.
It's a separation thing more than a calming
Yeah, it would
thing?
separate the pedestrians from the
Okay.
traveling vehicles.
I too had a question that I think Ron was touching on, so if you don't mind, I'd like to have Greg opine for us a little bit here, just because it is highly counterintuitive to almost everybody I've ever talked to, including myself, that there's liability associated with the city putting in stop signs and then us being sued for putting in a stop sign that's not warranted.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the City Council. The issue, the counterintuitive part of it is comes out of the Government Code, and it's Section 830.6 of the Government Code. That section enables, well, I should put it this way, protects municipalities from liability through a concept called qualified immunity. And qualified immunity means that if the city designs traffic improvements like stop signs in accordance with adopted standards or engineering studies or advice that is reasonably and calculated to preserve safety and is also supported by substantial evidence that comes in the engineering studies, we can get qualified immunity as a public agency. So the studies that staff is pointing to, the warrants and the engineering study that is recommending against stop signs, could put the city at risk of liability if we installed an improvement despite the evidence on the record that stop sign, in this case a stop sign, is not warranted by the substantial evidence. So when we looked at the standards, and I was talking with the city engineer and the public works director about this, when we looked at those standards, that's why the recommendation you have before you is is not to put the stop sign in because we don't have the evidence in the record. Now, the state standards that we utilize talk about public safety and pedestrian safety. But if you look at the report and its recommendation, it took into account the pedestrian safety issue. So stop signs, because of the evidence you have, it's not indicated to put a stop sign. So the main liability issue, and I'll underline this point, is the absence of the warrants takes away a defense that the city would have from a future automobile or pedestrian accident. So that's why it's counterintuitive. If it's not indicated by the warrants, we have increased liability by installing something that people think is a safety device. But if we don't have the substantial evidence in the record to support that, we are still exposed to liability from a future lawsuit that could be imposed, whether it's a vehicular, pedestrian, or other type of accident at that intersection.
And it would be something along the lines of an unwarranted set of stop signs is installed, and an accident, let's say between a car and a pedestrian, occurs. The pedestrian sues the driver, and the driver would turn around and sue the city, saying you gave the pedestrian a false sense of security by putting those stop signs in there that don't belong there?
Well, that would be one of the scenarios, but the more likely scenario, given the concept of joint and several liability, is that both the pedestrian would likely be advised by their attorney to sue the city based upon this hypothetical set of facts where there was an unwarranted stop sign. The driver would cross-complain against the city, saying it wasn't my fault that this accident happened, it was because you had an unwarranted traffic control measure. So everyone would be pointing the finger at the city, and it's possible that under that scenario, through comparative fault, that some fault might be assigned to the driver, some fault might be assigned to the pedestrian. But if there's any fault assessed against the city, we're the deep pocket, we're the ones who are going to take the majority of the cost of the litigation and the liability for it.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Sure.
So would the judge have to find that the stop sign played a role in the accident? So in that scenario, if a driver ran through a stop sign, the driver, is violating the traffic law. Could the driver say, well, I don't have to follow the traffic law because the city is not warranted in putting a stop sign there?
That wouldn't be the analysis. The analysis would be, even if the driver was violating, we'll go with that hypothetical that the driver was violating it, they'd still say, aha, unwarranted traffic control device. So I'm not entirely at fault, I'm partially at fault because of this traffic control device. And the city would lose that qualified immunity that's important from a defense standpoint, because if you used adopted standards or engineering judgment, we can assert that, and that's an absolute bar to liability.
Sure.
But if we don't do that, we could still defend ourselves by saying there's other factors, the driver was breaking the law, but we'd still be in the case till the end, and a jury could decide whether or not we had even that small percentage of fault in the accident, which could trigger a huge judgment depending on the nature of the injuries.
And how would you quantify the risk? Can you give us a sense of the likelihood of that scenario unfolding?
Okay.
And have we seen examples of it in other communities in the Bay Area, other things?
It's, this is I bet you there are several cases like that kind of hypothetical traffic control device fault, hypothetical probably in every county in the Bay Area or the state even. And we had a similar case in San Carlos just last year where we were sued at an intersection off of Old County Road where the plaintiff in the case was injured in an auto accident. He was alleging that we had placed the stop sign limit line too far back from the intersection so that his visibility was impaired. So we were being sued by the driver of the vehicle who caused an accident, who was injured, saying that that intersection wasn't designed properly. Fortunately, it met all the standards for intersections of that type, and so the city had no liability in the case. So it's even happened in here recently, in San Carlos recently, and there have been other cases like it in San Carlos, but not since I've been the city attorney. But so it does happen. It's a real risk. Can I say that that'll ever happen for any particular stop sign in the city? I can't say that, but I'm just providing the city with the city council with the risk of doing something that isn't warranted or supported by expert testimony or expert opinion.
Ron, I think you said you had a follow-on question.
I didn't relate it to case law, but Cameron asked it, and so it's been answered. Thank you.
I think with my colleagues' concurrence, we have a number of speakers who wish to comment on this. We'll take some public comment, and if there are other questions that come out afterwards, we can follow that up. What I'm going to do here, again, we ask each of the speakers to limit themselves to about 2 minutes. I'll let you know if you start getting over that. And I ask that as we call people up, I'll announce a name in forward position, so the first person should come up and the second person should get ready. So our first speaker is Megan Miller, and our second speaker is Charles Vidano. And apologies, by the way, if I mess anybody's name up, feel free to correct me.
Hi, thank you so much for, I'm Megan Miller. Thank you very much for keeping this topic top of mind. I wanted to start tonight by saying that after working with all of you and with Public Works and with TNC, that I know that we have your support, that we all want the same thing. We want a solution that's effective, timely, and cost-conscious. And I feel good that there's consensus, that there's some recognition that there is an issue and we're all working towards trying to find it. So I'm really appreciative of that. I know we have the support of the community, the PTAs, the principals of the 4 schools, the school board, the neighborhood directly affected by the poor safety in our neighborhood. Everybody, all of the stakeholders are on the same page. As you know, we've been working on this for a long time, not just me, but neighbors, who have been in this neighborhood for many years before me. And getting solutions to address these concerns is very important to us. I know there are a lot of people here. I just wanted, if you could raise your hands if you're here from Cordilleras, because I don't think everyone's planning on speaking, just to get a sense that there are. It's not just me and a couple of other people, and you have seen the petitions that we've submitted. Based on the staff's recommendations, I can see that we're on the same page regarding speed humps, so I'm not going to address that because it sounds like there's some consensus around the speed humps, so I'm hoping that you will approve those tonight. I wanted to quickly address the stop sign versus the raised crosswalk recommendation. The intersection at Elizabeth is not safe. Just this week, as a driver, so I was the driver, not just the pedestrian, I had a hard time seeing pedestrians in the morning. So when you're driving south on Cordilleras, crossing through the intersection Elizabeth as you're going to Bretton Acres or another school in that direction, the combination of the glare just at that exact time when you're going to drop your kids off at school, and all the cars are driving in that direction, the glare of the sun coming up combined with the dew on your windshield and on your car makes it literally impossible to see. Every morning the kids are saying, we gotta, how can we get in the car? I mean, it's very difficult to see the glare. And I just come to a complete stop anyway. There's a stop sign at Bell where Bretton Acres is, and forces you to stop, but we actually are rolling down all the windows and sticking our head outside the thing because you just can't see the people who are trying to cross there at Elizabeth. Just today, I saw a woman who was trying to, she was
Megan,
with her
I just
dog.
want to let you know that's 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to say 3 more things. I won't give that other example. Unless the raised crosswalks are proposed to cover all 4 sides, and I think they're only proposed to cover 1, they do not address our concern. The concern is crossing Elizabeth. And crossing Elizabeth, because of the way that the cars drive down Cordilleras, when you're trying to walk to school along Cordilleras, crossing Elizabeth, that is where the problem is. And the proposed raised crosswalk going across Cordilleras does not solve our problem. So I will stop since I'm over time, but if you have any questions about the proposals, I'd be happy to, because I've spoken to the neighbors at length about all of these things.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Charles Vidano, and after Charles, we have Jennifer Bay.
Hi, my name's Charles Fidano. I'm a resident of San Carlos since 2002. I actually have 6 minutes because Cassie and Kate ceded their time to me. Thank you very much, the children. I'm joking, of course. I live one house from Cordilleras and Elizabeth intersection. I've been supporting the Cordilleras neighborhood group for quite a bit of time. I've spoken in front of the TNC committee. Appreciate the opportunity to present our case to council again. My previous comments focused on the risks of Cordilleras, the concentration of traffic in the morning and the evening, the speed of the traffic, especially along the Cordilleras and Elizabeth corridor, the pedestrian experience. We don't get any trick-or-treaters. Nobody comes down our streets too unsafe. We don't get a lot of walkers. And the driving experience. People are very aggressive on the street because they want to get through there fast. I read the reports prior to this meeting. I was really surprised as Cordilleras being classified as a collector street. An interesting classification given the demographics of the street, the presence of schools, the width of the street, and the residential concentration. I appreciated the studies of the 4 stops, also very interesting and comprehensive, perhaps not based entirely in the reality that the street faces. This time I'd like to focus on how I, as a parent, address the risks of living on Cordilleras. We have 2 boys, ages 6 and 3.5. The boys are banned from the front yard. Where our front door has double locks. We have a lock high to keep them in the house so that they don't go out on the street. We installed a 3.5-foot fence in the front yard. The purpose, not security. The locks are not security. The locks are to keep the boys in. We installed 2 gates. We have slide locks on the outside so that they cannot run out on the street at any time. And we train the boys also not to go past the driveway. These are all defenses against the dangers on Cordilleras, and the risk is so much higher than other roads. The risk is very similar to Alameda or Britain. What I'm trying to communicate is that we appreciate everything that's gone so far. It's a lot of work, a lot of support's gone forward, and the speed bumps, everything's great. We just want to make sure that we're addressing and identifying the best things that will make the street as safe as possible. In conclusion, I'd say I appreciate the analysis, I appreciate the classification, but I kind of see a disconnect between the analysis and the engineering study and the realities that we face on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vidano. Jennifer Bay, followed by Christy Fletcher.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Jennifer Bay. I live on the 700 block of Cordilleras, and tonight with me I have my sons, Ethan and Jackson Bay, and like the previous speaker mentioned to you, my sons are not allowed to play in the front yard. They are not allowed at 9 years old to walk to school themselves. They don't cross the street themselves. And one thing I'd like to point out is that we are forced to cross Cordilleras in the middle of the block. There is no opportunity. We live on the east side of the block, and we must cross Cordilleras every morning and every afternoon to get to the safe shoulder, because our side of the street doesn't even have a safe shoulder. So we don't cross Cordilleras at Elizabeth. As Ms. Miller was talking about, we cross at the Elizabeth Cordilleras intersection. We're crossing Elizabeth, and the traffic we're concerned about is the people turning right or left very quickly without a stop sign from Cordilleras onto Elizabeth. That is the traffic that we have to cross, is those people who are turning onto Elizabeth or possibly people turning off of Elizabeth, but the people turning off of Elizabeth have to come to a full stop. The traffic we're most concerned about at that intersection are the people turning onto Elizabeth. So it's slowing down that traffic that's entering that intersection and making them come to a complete stop to look for pedestrians, not just crossing Cordilleras. Most of us have to cross Cordilleras long before we get to that intersection. It's crossing the other parts of the intersection. That's where we have to cross, because my kids don't have a safe way to get to that intersection on Cordilleras. They have to cross in the middle of the street. So that was the first thing that I wanted to talk about. Secondly, I'd like to address the city attorney's arguments about qualified immunity and placing a stop sign in unwarranted.
Jennifer, that is 2 minutes.
I'm sorry.
No, this, just so you know.
Okay. I would like to point out that there is an exception to the general rule of qualified immunity under Government Code 1815.26, and under the circumstances that you are, in fact, on notice of the dangerous condition of this admittedly substandard collector street with no sidewalk, it seems to me that your qualified immunity in this situation is greatly at risk, and you have much less or much greater opportunity for an argument that that the city is liable if you don't put a stop sign there and don't do something to bring this street, this collector street, up to a standard that makes it safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christy Fletcher, followed by Lisa Porter.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you again for hearing our concerns. This has been a big deal to the neighbors on Cordilleras for many years. My husband and I have lived there 10 years, and before we had children, safety was always an issue. And now our children are 7 and 9. I almost forgot the age of my children. They're growing so fast. We attend Britton Acres School right now. But unlike some of my neighbors who've said, you know, definitely that Elizabeth intersection is dangerous, but we are crossing, our main concern right now is at crossing Elizabeth. However, I think we all need to be looking bigger picture and longer term, because all of these kids, and there's 5 families next year alone that go to Britton Acres and cross Elizabeth now, and that's a safety issue. But next year we're going to be crossing across Cordilleras and going to Central. And you've got all those families that live on that parallel street of Tamarack behind us. And there's at least 5 other families on that block as well that have kids that are going to be crossing Cordilleras. So a 4-way stop, while I can understand we need to think, there always has to be a discussion of liability, but we have to look about and think about bigger picture and, you know, what we owe safety to the kids on our street too. And so I asked you to consider that. Speed humps seem to be the biggest consensus on our street. All of the neighbors seem to be, and I represent 3 other families that couldn't be here tonight. We hope that you'll pass the speed humps part of this tonight. We'd like to move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Next speaker is Lisa Porter, followed by Conrad Murata.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Porter, and I live at 778 Cordilleras. I want to say that I'm an enthusiastic supporter of speed humps, and I also really firmly believe that sidewalks and a stop sign are really important on Cordilleras for public safety. And in fact, you know, I think at this point with a stop sign and having people rolling a stop sign would be a far cry better than the situation we have now, and would be a significant improvement. Is the situation now, cars take that turn without slowing down, and you have, you know, 2 schools in that area, both Britton Acres and St. Charles. I had some similar to questions as JR and also Chuck Vadano. So, you know, in terms of liability, my question you would be, given that you have several residents on record as witnesses to this intersection and stating how unsafe we believe it to be, what would the city's liability be if there was an accident without a stop sign there? I know that we've talked about the fact that there's been very few accidents, but I do believe there's been many close calls. And I think we've got everyone sort of bearing witness to that by the fact of how they've put some strict restrictions on their children. I've also shared Chuck's surprise that this street is considered a collector street, given that it's really not designed as one. Without sidewalks, there is absolutely no barrier between the pedestrians and the cars that cut through there. Lastly, I would say, while I have not witnessed a close call in terms of a close call with humans on this street or in this intersection, my dog was hit by a car right in front of my house last spring, a car that was going too fast and a car that was unable to avoid it because it clearly was not the driver's fault that the dog went out into the street, but the driver clearly could not avoid it. And not only did they not avoid it, the driver kept driving and never stopped after a significant impact and injury to the dog. So, thank God that wasn't a kid. And but I do believe that we're playing with fire. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. The next speaker is Conrad Marotta, followed by our last speaker, last speaker I have a card for at this point, Aaron Walker.
Hi, I'm Conrad Marotta, and I've been living there for 18 years, my wife and I, and that street to me doesn't feel safe, even for me. I don't have any children, but it doesn't feel safe. And the other thing that we've seen is we've been talking about this for 18 years. We were coming to meetings 18 years ago, and some of my other neighbors who aren't even in the neighborhood anymore were involved in it. And we've been talking about this. We've been to several meetings. I've been here before, and I'd really like to see something done. I like the speed hump idea. I think we should go forward with that as soon as we can. And the neighborhood has gotten, the demographics of the neighborhood have changed. When I moved in, my wife and I were some of the youngest people in the neighborhood. Now we're some of the oldest, and there are you see all the children that are here. They weren't here 18 years ago. The families weren't here 18 years ago. So the neighborhood's become much more populated with children, and I think it's a really dangerous situation. I'd like to see something done about it. As far as your comment, Mayor, about parking on our side of the street, which is the west side, there's no sidewalk, so if you were to allow parking, I'm afraid what would happen would be you would have cars parking in the marked off area where people are supposed to walk, which would actually be worse. And Councilman Grasili, I do appreciate you slowing down when you go to the little bump outs, because one of them is right across from my house. Anyway, thank you. After 18 years, I think we really should do something about this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marotta. Our last speaker I have a card for is Aaron Walker.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Erin Walker, and I live, I guess I'm about 4 doors down from the infamous corner of Elizabeth and Cordilleras. And I brought my 3.5-year-old daughter with me. And I greatly echo other comments this evening in terms of my daughter is not allowed to play in the front yard. She doesn't play on the front lawn. I don't let her go in the driveway when I take the garbage out. She has to stay right by the garage door, and that's definitely due to safety. Our street, I didn't realize it when I bought my house in 2007, but the street is kind of a death trap. But it is quite scary. There's cars going very quickly down it. There really is no reason for them to stop until you get to those bump outs, which is long past my house and long past the Elizabeth intersection, which is definitely, I agree with everybody, it's crossing Elizabeth that is the difficulty. We are definitely in favor of the speed humps, and are definitely in favor of, looking at the stop sign, and a 4-way stop would be tremendous at that intersection. I think it would add so much more safety. People would slow down, and it would make our neighborhood safer and allow our kids to make it to school in one piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Does anybody else wish to address the council on this topic this time? Okay, seeing none, if my colleagues don't mind, there actually were, I think, some questions raised by some of the speakers that I'd actually like to have staff respond to, and then I'll open it up for any other questions that people may have. One of the themes, Matt, that came up several times, several speakers talked about, was that the real issue is crossing Elizabeth and apparently of traffic turning onto Elizabeth from Cordilleras. Did the study that was done examine that kind of thing specifically?
Yes, the traffic engineer went out during peak hour volumes and took a look at the intersection themselves and observed it, and they didn't find anything from an engineering perspective that seemed like an apparent conflict.
Okay. Another question that came up, I forget which speaker had mentioned it, but we've talked about that this road designated as a collector, if what's the relationship between something being designated a collector, and does that require that it have sidewalks, or is that more a function of how wide the travel lanes are? And so the sidewalks are sort of irrelevant whether they're there or not.
If something is designated as a collector, we have a city standard that requires that when you build a collector itself, that sidewalks need to be put in. As for when it was designated in the general plan, I'm not sure as to the reason why they were put in there. Maybe that could be something that would be.
Through the chair, could you define why what's a collector? I mean, how is it a collector? Why is it a collector? Because it runs the lanes.
So I would suppose that it's a collector per the general plan because it does run north-south and connects San Carlos Avenue and to Britain, and it's it helps with the kind of circulation in that area. Like I mentioned earlier, it's one of two streets between El Camino Real and El Camino de los Pogas that does that.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question. if I
Go ahead,
may.
Matt. No.
Since we're on this term,
Yes,
collector.
please, go ahead.
The general plan is brought to the city council. The city council approves the general plan. That street was designated, probably unbeknownst to the council at the time, because they don't get, we don't necessarily get into that kind of grain of detail. But the question is, since the council approved the general plan, which included that being designated a collector, can the city council undesignate the street as a collector? And if we did so, would there be any benefit in the issues we're trying to solve here?
I think from a legal perspective.
Looks like Mr. Rubens is going to opine for us.
Well, to change the designation would require a general plan amendment because it's in the general plan. So there's a big, long process to do that. And I'm not sure it would have any effect because it might have an effect on some findings that you might have to make about whether you want to preserve its role as a collector. But as far as the liability issues we've discussed, I don't think it makes any difference because the same people would still be.
However, and I want to hear from the engineer because he had said earlier the reason the travel lanes have to be 11 feet is because it's a collector. So if we undesignate it as a collector, then the travel lanes don't have to be 11 feet. What would the width be?
The width itself, I believe, would be at a minimum 10 feet. However, traffic itself acts kind of like water. If you undesignate something as a collector, I believe the vehicles will still travel down that road. My assumption would be that stretch, that quarter of Cordilleras was designated as a collector to begin with because of the fact people use that as a cut through between San Carlos Avenue and Britain.
Thank you, Mr.
Since
Mayor.
we will have an interesting discussion here in a moment. Two other questions that I made notes of that came up. One speaker, Greg, had mentioned that had raised the question of what happens to the city's qualified immunity now that we've had these hearings and we have a whole bunch of people testifying that this road is not the safest thing in the world, in their opinion.
Well, in my opinion, we're talking about two different things. One is qualified immunity for its design immunity. It's for the design of the intersection. So what I was talking about is that if you design an intersection outside of engineering expertise or a legal or recognized standard, then we would lose our qualified immunity. What one of the residents was talking about is dangerous condition on public property. Dangerous condition of public property is everything from cracked sidewalks to deteriorating infrastructure, bridges, things that fail, culverts and our creeks that might fail that are not. We have design immunity for all those things because they were designed to a standard. But if they're deteriorating, for instance, and we don't do something about that, then we could have dangerous condition on public property, which is a different issue than the design immunity that I'm talking about. So if you need me to kind of go into detail about using a hypothetical, I could.
No, not for me. I think that makes sense. The last question I had, Matt, for you is I got the impression from several of the speakers who talked, the ones who specifically talked about how they do not allow their kids to play outside in the front yard or they limit access to the front yard. I got the impression that a lot of their concern had to do with speed of traffic along that section of the road, but also of the lack of sidewalks. And I was wondering whether that came up in discussions with the neighbors as sort of a separate issue from the crossing of Elizabeth.
Yes, that did come up as we went through discussions with the neighborhood group themselves. The neighborhood group essentially indicated that they were not yet prepared to, as a group, formally request a sidewalk be put in because they were unsure of the implications for specific households. There are certain properties right now that have, say, cutouts for parking spots in their front yards, and if we put a sidewalk in, it would affect certain properties, whether it's removing that frontage parking cutout where they can no longer park there, or taking some of the frontages of the yards that were previously encroachments into the city right away.
Okay.
And so
Thank you.
they could not, as a group, decide that.
I see at least one other question for Matt. So let's do our last few questions here and we'll get into discussion. Mr. Grocott, just to distinguish you from Matt.
Yeah. Two questions. One, it was mentioned that the homeowners especially would like to see the speed humps. Those are available in a temporary nature. I've seen them put in other jurisdictions before on a temporary basis as a trial. Was that considered? Is that too expensive, or could we look at that option? As we're discussing it, what would happen if we looked at that option?
Speed humps?
Speed humps that were put in temporarily. And the reason I mention it also is because one of the letters that we got from the neighborhood suggested that. I think it was an older letter that went one of the other hearings, but they talked about what if we put in speed humps as on a temporary basis, as a trial basis.
I see. The speed humps that we were envisioning were ones that would be permanent. I think our goal is not to put in a traffic control device or a traffic calming measure and then remove it and go back and forth. From what I understand, in the past, that's what happened with some of the bulb outs.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do is kind of do an exact installation of whatever solution that we want. And if we put it in there, our intention is to keep it in there.
However, my question is, because I intend to bring it up as a discussion item, so I want to know if we discuss it as a council and we go in that direction, what's the ups and downs of that?
I guess the ups and downs is you're installing a traffic calming device at a specific location and then later removing it, which may further confuse drivers of what goes in there and what may be in there and what may not. From an installation perspective, there's just an additional cost to install it and then remove it. I'm not sure of the traffic hump material that we'll install, but we were envisioning using asphalt, so it would require grinding away that traffic hump if we were to remove it and repaving.
Okay. And then the last question I have.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize. I was just sorry.
He was just getting his dibs in next.
Yeah, okay. The last question I have is, it occurs to me, the presentation by the homeowners and the people who live on the street came across far differently than the staff. And that's not a criticism. I'm just noting that, because as I listen to them, the biggest issues seem to be the crest of the hill and the danger zone that exists at Elizabeth and Cordilleras, and especially when they were talking about people making right-hand or left-hand turns, and the difficulty that creates for people who are actually walking along Cordilleras north or south and trying to cross Elizabeth. I frankly hadn't thought about that until it was mentioned during public comment. And so the thought occurred to me, if the city attorney is advising against stop signs, I know one of the other things that works real well when you're driving, and we have them in town inadvertently because of engineering, you might say, from years ago in the 50s, and that is the dips that occur at certain places for drainage, for surface drainage. And boy, you slow down when you come to those. And I was even thinking about myself as I do a lot of mountain bicycling, and I do some mountain biking, and when you come to a hump, you have fun, you jump it, and off you go. But when you come to a dip, you slow down. And so I could see if we put in dips for quasi-drainage purposes, I suppose, but that would in effect create the same thing for people turning, going through the intersection, whatever. It would slow them down. Could we look at that? And I'd also like to know the fire department's response to that, because I know it's an issue for them, both whether it's a hump or a dip. If they're trying to go through there with a fire engine, it can be an issue.
Yeah, we can definitely take a look at that. What just comes off to mind is with dips themselves, you got to worry about drainage. You're essentially creating kind of a cavern for the area.
Right.
Like you alluded to, the dips and the humps kind of serve the same purpose. There's a vertical offset that requires vehicles to slow down. One of the beauties of the raised crosswalk itself is that it is a speed hump right at that intersection, so that would actually help slow down vehicles as they're driving down Cordilleras and such. And we can go and take a look at the legs crossing the Elizabeth portion of that intersection as well to see if there's anything that could possibly be done there. But at those legs, there already are stop signs. So.
Thank you.
Bob. Well, the question was raised, you just about raised it there, Matt. So the raised sidewalk you're proposing is at the north, is going to cross Cordilleras at the north side?
We have not yet determined if it's the north or the south side, but it will cross Cordilleras.
Okay. Why not put 2, why not put 3, why not put 4? Put them all up. Well, cover the corners.
We could do that. The challenge was that we were trying to accomplish certain goals by kind of slowing down speed as they enter that intersection.
I understand, but
I could see them being installed at crossing Cordilleras. Initially, we did not look at Elizabeth because there were already stop signs there, but that's something we can evaluate.
Okay. Mr. City Attorney, is there an issue there? Can we, tonight, if we decide to, can we sort of add on to the staff recommendation without causing any undue lack of immunity or loss of immunity?
I'd want to
crosswalks.
Well, my opinion on this is that we don't have in the study that those adding raised crosswalks either at the side intersections or all 4 intersections before you tonight. That could be studied and then brought before you as a recommendation. But part of what, because we don't know exactly where the speed humps are going to be on Cordilleras and where they're going to be positioned.
Nor do we know where the crosswalk is going to be either.
Right. It could be the concept and the direction that was given to the consultant and evaluated by the city engineer was to slow the traffic down. So that's the main goal of the humps, is to slow the traffic down.
Right.
So the placement of the humps as you approach the intersection, whether it's the crosswalk, or if the humps are positioned as close as legally permissible between Elizabeth on both ends, would that have an effect of slowing down the traffic? I think that's what the expert's saying, that it would slow down the traffic. But we don't have that precise question answered, and I know I'm being cautious here, but we don't have the precise question answered about what the safety impact of having the speed humps on left turns or right turns coming off Cordilleras.
Let's use the right term, though, sir.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Raised crosswalks.
Raised crosswalks,
Yeah.
because there are no sidewalks except on the southern part of the intersection.
But, of course, the thing is, it isn't identified where we're putting this crosswalk to begin. That's the thing. There's no specifics. That's why I'm just wondering if we can't sort of drive the bus through the little hole that's there.
Well, if I may, I'd like to jump in there.
I think it's the two on the side is all.
Yeah, it's,
I'm not sure that maybe I didn't hear it. I don't know that the traffic study actually studied raised crosswalks. I think raised crosswalks were a thought that staff came up with in reacting to community input, neighborhood input. And so if it wasn't part of the study, then I don't really see, I mean, your argument would almost take the whole resolution out of play. And I think instead, if the raised crosswalks are really a response that staff came up with based on neighborhood input, why can't we expand the scope of the raised crosswalks?
Mayor, I just would like to make one correction. The raised crosswalks was suggested as an alternative to an always stop within that report. At the end of the report, they cited a couple traffic calming devices, which was the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, the in-roadway lights, and the raised crosswalk.
Okay. Did they limit it to just the one?
No, they did not limit it to this one. Staff went and took that evaluation and looked at it. As we mentioned earlier, the raised crosswalk would go across Cordilleras itself.
But we don't know which side yet.
We have not settled on which side yet.
Okay.
And we assumed that we were looking at one because we felt that would help address the situation at that intersection.
Let me interject here for a second, because I was getting into this a little bit too. I think we're actually moving into discussion.
Okay,
which is fine.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for staff before we move into discussion? Ron?
I have one question. I think it's probably for Mr. Rubens. One of the speakers mentioned a 1815.26, a code exemption. What do you know about that?
Oh, I missed that one. Thank you.
That's the discussion we had earlier about a dangerous condition on public property that is different than the qualified immunity that I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
So it's not an exemption. It's not another warrantable factor. It's in a different area of the law.
It's in a different section of the government code, and it's where you have a dangerous condition on public property, the city can be liable. But this is a section that I was talking about earlier in the meeting, is a qualified immunity for design of public intersections in this case, but public property in general. So we have immunity for design, which overrides the dangerous condition. But you could have a situation where you have a public improvement that was designed appropriately to the standards that existed at the time, but there's been some change in its character, i.e. it's failed in some way. And the simplest example is on Burton Park. It's public property, and a tree raises the sidewalk up, and it goes up more than the standard that the engineering says it should go up, and someone trips on it. That's the simplest example of, it was built to design standards, but we don't have qualified immunity because the tree root lifted it up and it's no longer in compliance with that design, and it's created a dangerous condition.
Okay.
I don't know about you. I'm still confused. It seemed to me that
They're two different things. One is dangerous condition on public property. One is an immunity from someone alleging a dangerous condition on public property. It's an immunity created by the fact that we designed it in accordance with standards that were in effect at the time you approved the improvement, or were supported by engineering analysis at the time you approved the improvement.
So basically, this does not give us, it doesn't allow us to put in a stop sign. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think you have the power to put in a stop sign. It's just the advice is that you should not put in a stop sign because we would lose our qualified immunity.
The design immunity.
And then the issue of the other crosswalks, and Matt can correct me, but I don't think, the reason I'm being very cautious on the Elizabeth's raised crosswalks is I don't believe those were studied in the report. The speed humps and the raised crosswalk were all described on Cordilleras, and the movements that are described by the residents as being the movements of most concern would be left and right turns across a raised sidewalk when people are making the left turn or the right turn from Cordilleras. And I don't think the safety of that has been studied, and we want to make sure the design of that is up to standards.
Well, according to Matt, none of that was studied. This is staff's recommendations to put in the humps and the crosswalks.
I was actually incorrect. He said that the traffic consultant did recommend that raised
that's
Did I
in the
miss the
conclusion.
did recommend part? Because I didn't hear that.
He recommends it in the conclusion on page 5 of his report.
Just one crosswalk?
Just
I'm sorry.
one raised crosswalk.
One, but it doesn't say where.
Yeah, it doesn't say where. It's saying raised
Actually,
crosswalks.
you only get
It
one
was for
shot.
the-
Well, no, he actually,
For the
the
direction of
interaction that
travel.
Matt and I had was also that he didn't necessarily restrict it to just the one.
Well, that's my point. He didn't restrict it to one, so why couldn't you put in more?
Can
If I
let me-
may add here, I think just to cut through, I think what the staff is saying is there's not a problem with the council giving some direction, but it's going to require a little additional study and possibly a return visit to the council before we can say without a doubt that we will have properly studied and designed the intersection to accommodate all 4 raised crosswalks.
Let me ask if there aren't any other questions, we'll move into discussion. And as an addendum, follow on to what Jeff just said, I would actually phrase it a little bit differently. I mean, the council all along has the authority to put an unwarranted stop sign in without further study. It's a question of risk and risk liability. Okay, and one of the elements of that could be that we say, oh, we want this studied more thoroughly. This other option. Okay, so it's a question of doing something tonight versus doing something in the future.
Through the chair, I apologize. We can do still something tonight and have the other part studied, though.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
That's correct. And in fact, what I was going to suggest, just sensing from the flux of questions and partial discussion here, I am happy to entertain a motion here at this point. If people, given the complexity of this, if my colleagues would like to recommend a specific scenario that they would like to see, which may or may not match what the staff resolution before us is, I will entertain that as well. So who would like to start?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the staff recommendations to put in the 2 speed humps at, again, with further study on that, because you have to decide where it's going to go. We don't have to approve. I don't believe it should come back to us technically where it should go. I think staff is capable of addressing that. And the 1 raised crosswalk, with the addendum that staff study the other option of putting in 2, 3 more, 1, 2 or 3 more crosswalks.
Is there
covering the street?
Is there a second for that?
Okay.
Okay. Would somebody else?
I was going to second it.
Oh, I must not have been looking to the left.
Camera and the courtesy, but he didn't jump at it, so I would second that.
So you have seconded. Procedurally, I actually wanted to make a friendly amendment to that. Is this the appropriate time to do that, Greg? Okay. Bob, would you be willing to consider adding on to that staff explore with the neighborhood looking at putting in sidewalks?
I've driven that street a number of times. I don't think sidewalks are going to work there. So I wouldn't, but somebody else can make that motion.
Okay. So you would not accept my friendly amendment?
No. Okay. I'm not trying to be unfriendly, but no.
No, you're right. I didn't mean it to be interpreted that way. You do not accept my amendment to your motion. That's fine.
So I have another amendment. You'll have to help me on my parliamentary procedure here. But so my request for a friendly amendment would be to strike the raised crosswalk and to insert a 4-way stop sign at the intersection.
And, again, all of us, I want everybody to understand, there's nobody up here that doesn't want to have safety of children and pedestrians, okay? But you get pulled in a lot of different directions when you have I'm going to throw you under the bus. No, not really, get thrown in the bus. There are obviously legal situations come up in life, and we have to also address this for the entire city, not just for local areas. Unfortunately, for me, I can't accept that amendment. But there could be another amendment, you can make another motion, and it trumps mine if someone will second yours, Mr.
Right. So I guess from a parliamentary procedure perspective, I can make a motion to amend, since we.
No, actually, you would
You can make a competing
Competing motion, and
competing
then
motion.
we'll talk about yours before we talk about mine.
Okay. So I move we accept the staff resolution striking the raised crosswalk at the intersection of Elizabeth and Cordilleras and replacing that with a four-way stop sign at the intersection of Cordilleras and Elizabeth.
Second.
Second, okay. If I remember from the one time that this happened, since I joined the council, we act on the most recent motion first.
That's correct. The substitute motion is going to be discussed and then voted on first, and if that passes, there's no need to go to the earlier one. If it doesn't pass, then you go back to the earlier one.
Okay. Discussion.
I would like to jump in right away on this, if I may. Sorry, Cameron. The trouble I have with the speed humps, and this is why I asked about whether or not Margaret mentioned anything about this, because I know she's a cyclist, and I do a lot of cycling, and the reason I am familiar with the other part of Cordilleras in Redwood City, although I didn't know that was the name of it, is because I've cycled it quite a few times, headed from the school. I forget what the name of that school is there. Bob probably knows.
St. Matthias?
No, the elementary school that's in Redwood City that, anyways. I've cycled that quite a few times, and there are these speed humps. I guess there's 3 or 4 of them between the school site and Edgewood. And they do have probably about a 15-inch segment that's flat. So if you're a cyclist, if you can find that, you can get right through it. And like I said, I've ridden that dozens and dozens of times because when I go out on my rides, I go that way quite often, actually to avoid the Alameda. And one time, I was riding along there, and I pick up some pretty good speed because it's downhill, and somebody was backing out of their driveway. And so I reacted by moving over, and I moved over enough that I couldn't hit the flat spot, and instead I hit the hump. And like I said, when I'm mountain biking, when I hit a hump on mountain bikes, it's fun. You jump up in the air and off you go. Well, when you're road riding, it's not fun. And when it throws you into the oncoming lane, it's especially not fun. In fact, it's quite frightening. And that's what happened. So I don't like speed humps. And I could just see them on our street, on Cordilleras, and it's the same situation. Coming down from Elizabeth, from that intersection, headed towards San Carlos Avenue, which is another route that I take all the time, you can pick up some pretty good speed. And depending on where you propose to put these speed humps for a cyclist, even a cyclist that's, more casual, on a Huffy or something, those are going to create a problem, and they're a safety issue for a cyclist. So I don't like them. That's why I went with the stop sign, because while it may not be warranted as a cyclist, when I approach a stop sign, I know what to do. Stop, and then proceed. But when I'm dealing with speed humps, they are a risk taker, depending on how you approach them and how you take them. So that's my word on it.
Through the chair, the motion you seconded had the speed humps in it. I apologize, but it did. He said speed humps, but no crosswalks.
No raised crosswalks.
No raised crosswalks.
Well, then,
that doesn't mean
then I stand corrected on what I'm doing, but to some extent. But
Do you wish to make can we do a friendly amendment on the second motion to strike the speed humps?
That's the way you can do it. You can do a friendly amendment that the person who makes the motion accepts.
My motion is intended to embody the request of the neighborhood, which is speed humps with a four-way stop sign. So that was the purpose of the motion, and so I wouldn't I wouldn't.
So you would not accept his amendment? Okay. Then the question I would just ask, Matt, is does your second still stand of his motion?
Well, sure, because I wanted to discuss the item. It doesn't indicate my vote on it.
That's fair enough. That's true.
It's my
I just want to
discussion.
make sure you understood what was going on.
And I just would like to say I'm very glad that as a cyclist you actually stop at the stop signs.
Oh, yeah.
Because half the time I always worry about cyclists not stopping at stop signs.
They want to take that risk.
Yeah, I'd like to make a brief statement in support of my motion, if that's all right. So I think that the number one responsibility of government in general is public safety. And as we think about public safety, our number one priority should be the safety of children. And one way we have an opportunity to have a huge impact on that is making sure that kids have a safe way to get to school. And so when I look at this issue, I ask myself first, is the intersection dangerous? And having spent some time looking at the intersection and all of the comments, I think beyond a doubt it's a dangerous intersection. There's poor visibility, there's no sidewalks, and from personal experience, I was actually hit in a crosswalk very similar to what it would be like to walk across Elizabeth, where I was on a main busy street in Portland, Oregon. I walked across a very narrow, small intersection that was parallel. There was a woman who was driving. She was going to make a left. She was paying attention to the oncoming traffic. That's where her focus was. Once the oncoming traffic cleared, she turned and accelerated, went right through the intersection, hit me on the side, threw me in the air, landed on her car. My head hit her windshield, shattered the windshield. So I know that the kind of situations that are being described here are real. I've experienced them. And luckily, I was okay. But, an SUV versus a 9-year-old child, I'm seriously concerned about it. So the next question is, will a stop sign make this intersection safer? I think undoubtedly it will. And then finally, does the neighborhood want it? And we've seen through, good community organizing, unanimous support for putting a stop sign at this intersection. So the question is, why wouldn't we do it? And I think, the issues that have been raised about concerns about liability are real. But I would hate to feel that we are weighing, public safety and the safety of children against a very small chance of being sued. We live in a very litigious society, which I think is unfortunate, but I don't want to feel like we're making our decisions out of fear of being sued, particularly in the case in which, you get a license to drive a car, you know how to use a stop sign. So if there is an accident and somebody is suing because we put a stop sign there, from my perspective, it's a warrantless case. It's just, a wrinkle of the law and the unfortunate nature of a litigious society that there is some small likelihood that we would have to pay a settlement. But I don't think that should deter us from trying to take a reasonable step to protect public safety that has overwhelming support from the neighborhood. Thanks.
Ron?
Cameron brought up a very interesting point, and I'd like to ask our counsel, Mr. Rubens. Can I ask you a question about? I asked if, or actually Cameron asked earlier, was there case law, and that was going to be my question. I didn't ask it because he actually asked it before me, but. Given his comments and our potential liability, I guess the follow-up question is that certainly there is case law, and there have been cases where people have sued. Do we know how much at risk potentially we are, and what the results of some other cases were where people sued in these kinds of situations? I don't expect to have that information at this moment, but it'd be interesting to know. I mean, is there a limit? Do we have unlimited liability? That's my concern. Because I agree in spirit with most of the things that he's saying, but I have got a real issue. I do have an issue with the liability. I just want to find out what is exactly our exposure.
Well, we have, the city does have insurance through ABAG, and we will always maintain such insurance. And we have a $100,000 self-insured retention under that policy, which means the city pays for the first $100,000. And Jeff, maybe you know the limit of the liability. I think it's $25 million is the cap. So it's a pretty good. It's a good policy protection for the city. But what happens when you get a big claim like that is there's no free lunch, because the city's rates are going to be, for insurance, are going to be based on the claims that we have. Now, it's sort of like your homeowner's policy. If you have one claim and you don't have very many claims, your rates won't be affected very much. But if you have a big claim, if you have someone who's seriously injured at the intersection, then the claim could affect our rates. So you're actually paying for it because it's a big claim. It affects, a big claim can even affect ABAG and their budgetary requirements. So because we're not talking about a big insurance company. It's a pooled arrangement with other cities where all the cities contribute. So I'm just trying to answer it hypothetically. Yes, we have coverage to protect the city in the event we get a big claim, but a large claim would affect our rates. A smaller claim wouldn't affect them as much.
Through the mayor, if that finishes the question, I just want to be clear too, because we seem to be very much focusing on the liability issue, which of course is a matter that the council should consider in making any decision like this. But if we focus for a second on the warrant issue, according to these traffic engineering standards in the state of California, I think traffic engineers would tell you that stop signs don't necessarily achieve the assumption that Councilmember Johnson stated, that the intersection would be made safer by a stop sign. In fact, it doesn't meet the warrants. And, part of that is that, the traffic engineering standards would suggest that the intersection would not be made safer by a stop sign, and in fact could be made unsafe, could become an unsafe condition as a result of putting in stop signs. And we're seeing a little bit of that play out just in the behavior of the community. And this is a very common occurrence, as those of you who've been on the council for a while know. We frequently get requests for stop signs throughout the community. But part of the big problem with a stop sign is that it creates false confidence on the sense of pedestrians that somebody's actually going to stop for that stop sign. And, we have seen that. We've seen that here in town, where the same thing can on occasion apply to crosswalks. They provide sometimes a false sense of security. And this is not just about I don't want the public or the council to think this is just about a liability issue. It's about trying to create the safest intersection that we can with the tools that are available to us, and not put tools in place that we think might pose a problem. And that is in fact the staff's opinion of stop signs at this intersection. And I think one area we haven't heard from tonight that you might want to hear from is the chief of police.
Public safety, yeah.
Can I just briefly respond?
No, because I want to give Bob a chance to speak, and
Okay.
I want to speak too. And then I'll give you a turn to speak.
Mr. Malpe, you must be reading my mind, because I was going to ask if Chief Rothfuss or Chief O'Leary had any comments relative to stop signs. I don't know if you do, but I'd like to hear them.
Chief, before
I
you
apologize.
No, it's fine to raise it. But before we have the chief come up, did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, I just, yeah, that's all.
I also want to raise another different point to the one that Mr. Malpe raised. Jeff raised, and that is that we need to operate and think from a policy level point of view on the dais, I feel. And one of the questions that I've been wrestling with as I'm hearing the discussion going back and forth, and it's a very, very good discussion, very informative actually, is how do we not end up putting a stop sign on every single intersection in the city of San Carlos? The at the very least, if we go down this route, I think we're going to have to task staff with coming up with some kind of policy recommendation that we would apply, because basically heretofore what we've been doing is we've been using the policy matrix defined by the MTUCD or whatever that is. And we're not bound to follow that. But if we step away from that, we're going to have our own policy guidelines that we put in place, because otherwise I can just only imagine what it's going to look like. So, Chief, we had a request for you to come up and comment on this, and then Cameron and I will definitely give you an opportunity and others to speak as well.
Thank you, Mayor Olbert. Greg Rothis, Police Chief. First, before my comments, I just want to thank and acknowledge the concerns of the community and the neighborhood. Having raised kids in San Carlos and have had them go to schools in San Carlos, I do respect and understand their concerns. And I also respect the manner in which they went about addressing this situation and all the hard work. With respect to stop signs, just by way of background, set this one issue aside for now. It is extremely common for us to get speed complaints in neighborhoods. And along with accompanying those complaints is almost always a request for stop signs. And so it's not unusual for us to get stop sign request after stop sign request in certain neighborhoods. And also with that are stories. And there are stories of near misses and things that could have happened and things that almost happened. Unfortunately, that's not how intersections are designed. We don't design them by hearing stories. We have a process, and the process has to do with determining whether or not the warrants exist in order to put a stop sign there. I'd like to echo also some comments earlier. If we had placed a stop sign into every intersection where a community wanted a stop sign or a neighborhood wanted a stop sign, we'd all be doing nothing but stopping and starting on our travels through San Carlos, because that's how many stop sign requests that we have. With respect to this particular intersection, let's just say for the sake of argument that there is an hour every school day in the morning and an hour every school day in the afternoon where we need a stop sign at this intersection, and say for the sake of argument that is correct. If that's true, then that represents 4% of the time in any given year. That means what are we doing with the intersection like that 96% of the time? And why is it designed that way 96% of the time? And another issue has to do with respect to enforcement. What we're going to be asking the Sheriff's Office to do with our limited resources, obviously if the stop sign goes in there, is we're going to be asked to enforce a stop sign. We'll be asked to enforce a stop sign where it's not warranted, which will direct our resources away from places where it is warranted. Because if we're going to put a stop sign there, we're going to have to enforce it. And we have areas where we need to enforce, and I think all the council members are well aware of many areas in this community that are requesting traffic enforcement, where we have significant speed issues, we have accident issues, we have a lot of traffic complaint issues going on as well. So with respect to the community's concern, with respect to the children and everything that's going on in that neighborhood, I'm recommending against the stop sign for those reasons.
Thank you, Chief. Cameron, I think you said you had some
I had
comments
just a couple points. Bob, did you have any follow-up questions?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No. Thank you, Chief.
So I wanted to just respond real briefly to a couple points that Jeff made and to a point that you made, Mark. The first is the question about, whether or not this is warranted. And the issue that comes out to me from the analysis is that it is warranted from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. on weekdays, but it's not warranted if you extrapolate over the entire time. But that is the time we're trying to solve for. So from my perspective, yes, if you average out all of the traffic over the course of the day, it may not add up. But if you're concerned about trying to protect kids during high traffic time, when you have a confluence of both kids getting to school and commuters trying to get out to San Carlos Avenue, that's where you're trying to solve for. So with respect to the chief, I think, yes, maybe it's only 4% of the time, but that's the most important 4% of the time from my perspective and from the perspective of public safety. The second point was to Mark's point about how do you not create a precedent that we have to put a stop sign on every corner. And I think the simple answer to that is that we're prioritizing for routes to school. So adjacent to school where you have big intersections, and I don't think there are that many of them. We've made safe routes to school a big priority in the city. Jay cited a lot of examples of studies we've done. I think it's very easy for us to say a stop sign in this intersection protects kids when they're getting to school. Stop signs in other places don't fall to that?
With all due respect, Cameron, I think that argument fails very quickly because basically what it says is, are we going to tell the parents of one kid who happens to live on a block and walks a certain way to school, well, you're only one kid, so you're not important enough. Which I know is not your intent. That is
No,
not
certainly
your
not.
intent.
I mean, it's just simply
but
to say,
that's
yeah.
the failure of that argument, is because ultimately what you're trying to do is protect not a certain number of kids on their way to school, but protect kids on the way to school. That's really my concern, is we would have to establish some kind of threshold. And right now, our threshold derives from the state, which, and it has, like any threshold, it has pluses and minuses associated with it. One thing we haven't talked about much, except in passing, is to the extent that we divert drivers off of Cordilleras onto other streets, we actually may be increasing the risk of accidents happening on the other streets as well. And that gets us into yet another sort of trade-off area. One thing I wanted to bring up
Sorry, I had one last point too, but because you kind of interrupted me.
I thought you were finished, but make your last point.
My last point was to...
Or your next point. Doesn't have to be your last.
At least this go around. To Jeff's earlier point about stop signs give us false sense of security, stop signs, potentially create more dangerous situations. I hear that, but to some degree it defies common sense to me a little bit. I don't understand what stop signs are for, if not to slow people down, to protect intersections, to protect public safety. And if we're saying we don't want to put a stop sign up because it's going to create a dangerous situation, I sort of respectfully disagree. I know there are experts that may say I'm wrong, but I just don't buy that.
For what it's worth, and only in a very narrow, perhaps legalistic sense, I seem to remember reading someplace in my earlier research on this, in the vehicle code, California law actually says that stop signs are not to be used to regulate speed, for example. So in terms of slowing traffic down, that's in fact unlawful. And I guess I do personally think that there is some validity to the argument that we can create a false sense of security in people's minds. It's something I experience every day when I'm even at a controlled intersection with traffic lights and walk signs because of right turn on red. I mean, technically as a pedestrian, when that white light goes on and I can cross the street, I have the right of way. Actually, I have the right of way as a pedestrian, period. It's controlled. We have all had experience, I suspect, with the game of, whatever that creates there. And so I never act as if I'm actually safe.
If I might just quickly respond. I mean, I feel like that's why we teach our kids to look both ways. And, we teach our kids, no matter what intersection you go into, you want to make sure that there's no cars there or that the cars are slowing down. But if you were to ask yourself, would you rather have your kids crossing an intersection where there's no stop sign, or would you rather have them crossing at a stop sign? You would say, go down to the corner and cross at the stop sign. And so I don't think you would say, cross here on this unstop sign corner because if you go down to the stop sign, they're just going to run right through it. To me, it just defies common sense.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to call the question on this.
I actually had one other question.
I'm sure you did.
And I had a couple.
Actually, not a question, but
no, Mr. Collins has something to say too. I'm just,
I'm thinking about procedure here. You having called the question.
Procedure is if he calls the
Well,
question,
we
it takes a
vote on it.
majority. It takes a super majority vote. 4 people.
All right. So, who would like to cut off discussion and vote on the motion before us? Do we have 3 other people? Okay.
Fine, just
no,
fine.
that's fine.
I have some comments too when you get a chance.
One other thing I just want to throw into the mix is, which I was thought of when Chief Rothaus was talking about 4% versus 96%. Did staff consider, did we talk to the school district about whether it would make sense to put a crossing guard here for the 4% of the days that we actually are concerned about? I know that costs money, and that's yet another trade-off, but was that ever discussed or considered?
No, we have not yet had that discussion. The last time we met with the school district, I believe it was in December. We have an upcoming meeting within the next couple of weeks, and we were going to actually discuss that with them. But I know for the school district themselves, they obviously have limited funds, and they usually try to put crossing guards close to the schools, essentially at the intersections right next to school where the concentration of kids are the highest. And so from a resource perspective, they may not be able to accommodate that.
Is there a quick and dirty number that staff has on what it would cost to have a crossing guard at the 2 times a day when this is relevant? An hour, 2 hours a day, basically?
No, I don't have that number.
Just through the mayor, since my son went to Burton Acres a couple of years ago, they have volunteer parent crossing guards, but they're at the intersection of Bell and Cordilleras is where they because I guess there's a perception that Tamarack and Bell isn't as impacted, but that's how the school district does it. They do it by parent volunteers. So that would be the direction I think that we'd be asking. And I happen to know that Burton Acres used to have an entrance on Rutherford Court, which is off of Elizabeth. It's closed now. So the district's made a conscious decision to direct the access to Burton Acres School at Bell. So there's now no drop-off at other locations in the area. So to access that intersection, I think might require some school policy decisions about how they deal with Burton Acres access.
Okay. I know that we are going to have some continued discussion here, or at least I think I had indications that some other people wanted to make some points. I would ask my colleagues that we think about focusing this towards moving to a point of actually voting on the motion that's before us, which is sort of a low-key way of saying, I wouldn't mind calling the question either, but I don't want to shut down what's a fairly good
Can I just
discussion.
make
I know
one
I
more
can
point,
call the
Mr.
question
Mayor?
whenever I want to, but
Can I just make one more point, Mr. Mayor, about the motion that is about to be voted on? The amendment that was made to the resolution didn't make any changes to the findings, and some of the findings in the resolution talk about unwarranted stop signs. So what I'd like to do, and I know this takes time, but I'd like to either rework the motion tonight and have us make some substitute findings, which I don't usually recommend, or really look at the reports and possibly, based upon the testimony of the public here tonight. Of course, this is all contingent on the substitute motion passing, but I just want to make sure for the record that we at least look at that before the pending motion is voted on.
as a logistical matter, procedural matter, I understand what you're saying, Greg. It seems to me that ideally what we'd like to do is to see whether or not the motion passes, but with the caveat that what we'd actually be voting on is directing staff. Your ideal situation is direct staff to come back with an actual revised resolution that would button it up the way it needs to be, and we would then act on that at the next meeting. Is that correct? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just...
I would rather not wordsmith this in real time.
I agree, that's not recommended. We've done that before recently. What we've done is you've given direction to bring back a resolution that includes the pertinent point, which is to install stop signs, and then we would bring back a resolution where you would formally approve that.
Got it.
With changed and corrected findings.
So since it is not my motion, are the mover and the seconder willing to do that?
Well, my question is if we just struck the findings that I believe there are 2 of them that focus on unwarranted stop signs, would that be sufficient from your perspective?
I think that's another way of saying, can we edit this in real time? And I think that frankly, with our experience last fall with some of the decisions we made late and on the fly with Transit Village, personally, I would rather not repeat that unless there's some really overwhelming desire that we have to act on this tonight as opposed to at the next meeting.
Well, through the mayor, if I can, you can sort of have the best of both worlds by having a motion that would that would talk about the four-way stop sign and the 2 speed humps or some other combination, and then just add to your motion that on a future agenda, you'd like to see a resolution brought back with findings that support that conclusion. And so you'd essentially be taking action tonight, and we would just enhance that action with the
Okay, that's fine.
reso.
So you're willing to revise your motion as it stands to include
Sure.
that?
Yep.
Matt, you're okay with continuing to second that? Okay. Unless there is a desire for further discussion, I'm going to call the vote on this.
I do have a question regarding, it deals with the 4% issue. And that is, I know there are areas, as you're driving, you get around a school and it says speed limit during school hours, right? And I think that's 25, is that right? So the road is already 25, so there's no big deal there. But is there such a thing as, you can't afford to put in crossing guards, perhaps, people like we have at Bell. Are you allowed to put in temporary, stop signs that are just there during school hours or anything, or is that prohibited by vehicle code?
Well, I'll chime in on that one. It's basically the same issue, design immunity, having expert testimony to support having a policy that allows you to have temporary stop signs
So
during
it doesn't
part of the
change
day.
anything. Just a question.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, Bob.
When we go to vote on this, again, and again, as I mentioned before, in a perfect world, we could do a perfect job. This isn't a perfect world. The one thing I learned in 8 years up here is the more times that we try to create our own law or our own situation, and not saying that it wouldn't be for the good, we can get ourselves into a jackpot. The mayor alluded to that earlier about which I can guarantee, well, I shouldn't say this, I shouldn't say I guarantee. I would expect that if we pass and put stop signs here, we will have more of these this year than I've seen in 8 years in the next 6 to 8 months. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Maybe we need more stop signs. But when I have the chief of police stand up, and when I have the city attorney stand up, and I have the city engineer stand up with the balance of law and the way we do this, and again, trying to look at the entire city, because we're also charged with that, not just this one instance. It's very difficult for me to support that. I'm not saying I haven't voted against staff before. I have, and so have you, and so if you haven't, you will, because we all have. But in this situation, it's
That
very...
sounds like a challenge.
Well, I'm just telling you. Matt can buttress me on this one or not. I don't know whether I agree or not, but in my opinion, this is one that I just can't make the call on because I think it's just opening up Pandora's box. Believe me, I've got the street that I live on. I'll come marching in here with stuff on not sorry a stop sign, but humps or whatever. And believe me, we could use them on Crestview Drive. But again, I just make that point. Law of unintended consequences, and I'm not sure that this is going to work out. I'd much rather try what we have with warranted items and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work at all, I'll be right with you doing this. But and it's incremental and it's legal. But if we jump over that hoop, we jump over that line, there's no coming back to that. And I think we might find ourselves in a jackpot.
Bob, could I just...
I want to make a can I give a historical perspective on this?
Sure, go ahead.
Quickly. All right. Living here most of my life, a little boy was killed when I was 5 at the corner of Arundel Road and San Carlos Avenue. There's no stop sign. Never has been a stop sign. My daughter was broadsided at Britton and Elm, which has a 4-way stop sign. That was a few years ago. She's fine. But there's an example where you have a 4-way stop sign and somebody blew right through it. A girl was killed at Chula Vista in Alameda when I was in junior high. There's a stop sign there. And so I can tell you that in my lifetime there's been accidents and deaths at places where there were stop signs. And I'm not sure, given the weight of everything we've heard tonight, that it makes a lot of sense to go down this path until we are sure that it's the right thing to do.
Okay. Matt? Sorry, Cameron.
Cameron.
I was going to say to Bob, I think there's probably ways to address your concern if we included something about certain radius from a school and on streets of X number traffic flow or some way to do that. What I would say is I think if you could see your way to supporting it, we could probably find a way to not create the precedent that you're concerned about.
Fair enough. Yeah,
I hear you.
my concern always is, in this instance, doing this on the fly. Those all sound like great things to discuss, and not for us to discuss alone, but to have staff do research on. In any event, I think I'm going to call the question, which I believe I have the right to do. So,
Okay. Can we have a reading of the motion again, just one more time?
well, actually, it might be better to ask Cameron to describe it again, because he did adjust the resolution. He tweaked it.
So the resolution, it's the staff resolution, which, as printed, has two actions. One is a raised crosswalk at the intersection of Elizabeth and Cordilleras, and the second is 2 speed humps on Cordilleras Ave between San Carlos Ave and Elizabeth Ave. And my motion strikes the first one, strikes the raised crosswalk, and replaces it with a 4-way stop sign at the intersection of Cordilleras and Elizabeth. And then further direct staff to button that all up with findings that are supported and bring it back.
Right. All right. Was it, you got that?
I got it.
All
Thank
right. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
No.
Councilmember Grisilli?
No.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
No.
All right. So, as I recall from procedure, that defaults us back to the first motion, which was Bob's motion. Would you care to rephrase that? Which I believe Ron had seconded.
Basically, to recommend to accept staff recommendations for the 2 speed humps on Cordilleras, to be decided where the location is, and 1 raised crosswalk, which is part of the recommendation, but add on to have staff study and hopefully come back with 3 other, and able to do all 4 corners, which I think, hopefully, would be able to be happen. But anyway, that's the
Raised crosswalks.
Raised crosswalks, yes.
And you're
I'm okay with that.
okay. Unless somebody feels a compelling desire to discuss this. Yes, Matt?
Not really to discuss it, but I'm going to explain my vote, because I'm going to vote no on this. And really, my reasoning is, even on the other one, it was tough, because I'm looking at it, I want to do something. And like I think Mr. Grisilli said earlier, we all want to do something for safety.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I brought up the last time when this was coming our way, and I said I really wanted this whole corridor looked at. And I don't mean this disrespectfully to anybody, the staff or anything, but I just don't think we're doing this we're not approaching this the right way. This is piecemeal work, and we're adding furniture out there to try and solve a problem, but we're not really, in my opinion, looking at this full corridor and what it takes to fix it. And I don't think these speed humps are going to help. It's just more furniture. If anything, it's going to drive people off of the street and onto other streets, and we'll find safety issues elsewhere. I raised the issue about cycling, and I guarantee you guys, speed humps are a problem for cyclists, and yet here we are trying to push people into riding their bikes and getting around by bicycle and so forth, and creating issues for them at the same time. It's not fair. This is a big problem. It's a big safety issue. I went out there a number of times myself, but I don't think these are the solutions. And the things I'd like to see done out there are the things I alluded to and mentioned when we were asking staff. I don't really see an interest from the council on those kind of things, so I just have to vote no on it, as much as I don't want to, because I want to see something done for safety.
I'm glad, actually, Matt, that you explained that, because I actually agree with a lot of the points that you made, although for me the balance is I'm going to vote yes for this, because I do want to do something. And by the way, I completely accept and respect what you're saying. I know you want to do something too, okay? The point I wanted to make is I actually hope that that staff will continue to be thinking about this corridor in a bigger picture sense, and think about ways that we can maybe do some additional things different. But I'm going to vote in favor of this to move it forward. Any other comments that people would like to make?
I'd just like to add, I also agree with Mr. Grocot's comments. I'm going to vote yes simply because I want to see this moved forward. But one of the things that maybe staff can work on, and I don't know if it can be worked in, but we could talk about an additional speed hump. But the other thing I was thinking about was I'm wondering whether or not the speed humps can be modified to accommodate bikes without harming their intended purpose.
Certainly something that staff ought to take in consideration. Seeing no other comments, we will call the roll, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. That finishes that item. By the way, I want to thank everybody who spoke for roughly honoring our 2-minute limitation. I know it's very hard to do that when this is a passionate issue that affects the life and safety, health of your children in particular. But again, I very much appreciate you reflecting that or incorporating that. So we will move on to item 9B, consideration of adopting a resolution requiring that the park development facility fees paid by the developer of the San Carlos Transit Village be used exclusively at Loyola Park and receiving a status report on the relocation of shuttles and taxis and station area trash pickup. Good evening, Al.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. We're loading the presentation now, but just to kick it off, during the San Carlos Transit Village public hearings, the Greater East San Carlos Community Group raised a number of concerns, many of which were addressed by conditions of project approval. And this presentation, I'll go over some of those issues. Some of the issues are relocation of the taxis and shuttles from Old County Road on the east side to the west side, thank you, and improvement in trash pickup and park and lieu fees. So just to orient you, this is bird's eye view of the depot area, and this is the historic depot here. El Camino Real is located down below. We have Old County Road here, and the train tracks run this way. This is the parking area, the existing Samtrans parking area, which flanks the historic depot, San Carlos Avenue. And here's the existing taxi and shuttle area right here at the terminus of East San Carlos Avenue. And the GESC requested that shuttles and taxis be moved immediately from the east side to the west side and permanently to the other side in this parking area or somewhere thereabouts. In an earlier study, we took a look at this issue and we wanted to get some information as to what kind of an impact this might have on shuttle service. And in this traffic study that was done, it was determined that there would be a delay of about 3.5 minutes in the morning and about 7 minutes in the afternoon. Caltrain also noted in a letter that you received earlier today that there may be other complications such as the loss of grant funding, ridership delays, and transit center configuration issues, and we'll look at some of these things. Staff's understanding is that generally the City Council, your preference is to move the shuttles to the west side permanently, and they should stay there on the west side of the berm. So this is a look at how the transit village configuration would lay out. So it's different than what we saw in the existing configuration. So what we have now is the historic depot. Again, we have Old County Road and El Camino. But the parking is different. If the transit village was constructed, this area, the parking would then shift to the south. So this would be the new transit center. And what Samtrans has said, and they've looked at the issue, and one of the conditions of project approval of the transit village was to redesign this area to accommodate shuttles and taxis, and that they've looked at that. And they say, yes, you can move the shuttles and taxis over to this location. You can do that, but it would remove about 25 parking spaces in this area that would be used for other things. So it can be done. And again, you can see the old shuttle taxi area. And I'd like to throw in what is happening on the Eastside Connect project as well. So what you see on the screen there is the Eastside Connect. So we're looking at Old County Road here, and here's East San Carlos Avenue. The historic depot is right in here. And this is where that the existing shuttle location, or kind of the historic location of the shuttles and taxis are, and located here. What the Eastside Connect project would do would be to eliminate this shuttle area and create a large area for pedestrians and bicyclists to enter and exit the station area. And so this would all become like a larger sidewalk waiting area. And if shuttles were to be accommodated, or some pull-out areas for kiss and ride or other vehicles, it would be located here south and north of the station. So that's the current plan, is to move this cutout, make them a little bit smaller, and move them to the north and south of the current location. So that covers the issue of shuttles and taxis. And of course, we can get into more detailed discussion of that. I'm going to move on to improvement of trash pickup. And so in this slide, what I'd like to do is orient you to the responsibilities of all the people that take care of trash in this area. And this is the Joint Powers Authority area they take care of trash here and on the train platform area in here. San Carlos maintains this area in the right-of-way, and then some areas here in the landscaped areas here, and to the south as well. So we maintain all these areas here. And this would be the area that's maintained by the Joint Powers Authority. So the GSC requested that there be an improvement in the trash cleanup around and in the Caltrain station area. And this was, they brought this issue up a number of times during the public hearings. And they also wanted a better way to report problems when they saw them. So during the review of the proposed transit village, Public Works staff reviewed the issues and the frequency, cost, and adequacy of the city's trash pickup with our contractor, and met on site with Samtrans representatives to kind of get everybody straight on whose responsibilities, what everybody's responsibilities were. It's been noted, I think, since then that some folks may have seen, have said that they've seen trash coming down from the contractor that works on the top of the platform down to the areas that the city takes care of. But steps have been taken to improve the communication between Samtrans contractor and the city's contractor for trash cleanup. And the city also donated a cigarette butt receptacle, which was installed near the Old County Road area in here to facilitate cleanup of the cigarette butts in that location. Staff believes that both contractors have received the message that they need to work together better and keep the overall area clean and not create problems for each other by blowing debris out of their areas and into the other contractor's area. So staff believes that message has been made clear. Moving on to the area of park and lieu fees. During the San Carlos Transit Village public hearings, the GSC requested that the park and lieu fees paid by the Transit Village be used exclusively for the use of Loreola Park. And they also made some suggestions for what types of improvements they would like to see there, and those are the suggestions you see there on the screen. Because park and lieu fees are required for new development as part of the municipal code, this decision could be made through a resolution of the City Council, but it can't be made as a condition of project approval of the Transit Village, and that's why it wasn't. The park and lieu fee was adjusted back in 2013 to about $1,887 per room, and the project was approved at a certain density. We know that the developer is going back and looking at the development again and reconfiguring the development. So we don't know how many rooms are going to be there now. But just to give you sort of a scale to consider, the original approval was not to exceed 460 rooms. So right now we've been told that the range of density is around 200 units. So let's just say there's 400 rooms. So it's a reduction from the 460 rooms that could be constructed there. That would be about $750,000, in the range of $750,000 for the park and lieu fee. The attached draft resolution to the staff report provides park and lieu fees collected for the San Carlos Transit Village project is expended at Loreola Park in accordance with the city's Parks and Facilities Master Plan. And that concludes the staff presentation. I'm available to answer questions. We also have representatives from Samtrans and Caltrain here this evening. Of course, Jay Walter, our Public Works Director, is available, and I believe that Christine Bolin, our Parks and Rec Director, is also here. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Questions for staff? My goodness, after that last item, we had all those questions. We have no questions. I actually have one or two. Didn't want you to go away feeling unwanted, Al. Actually, let me ask this a different way first. So after Eastside Connect is implemented, the current shuttle drop-off area will no longer be there. It'll just be those two green zones to the north and south of the current area.
That's correct.
And those are going to be restricted somehow so that shuttles won't be able to use them?
That is yet to be determined. So I think based on the discussion and direction, guidance that we get from the City Council, changes could be made to that area and how it's used.
And do we, this may be a question for Greg, do we have the authority to be able to basically restrict those areas so that shuttles cannot use them? Even if we were to arrange to have the shuttles move to the other side, we don't actually control where they park.
Through the chair, could I ask a question? The only item on this agenda is for the park and lieu fees. Are we allowed to talk about, make any, I mean, I have lots of questions on those, but I have no questions on the park and lieu. So I'm trying to understand where this is going tonight. It's just a verbal report. I don't agree with the staff report on some of the things, nor the Caltrain letter that we got or whatever else. But are we going to talk about this, or what is your opinion on that?
Well, the agenda is it's basically a status report on the second item.
Mr. Mayor, but I got lots of questions.
On the first item, you can take action on the redirecting of the fees, but the second issue of the relocation of the shuttles and taxis and the stationary trash pickup, when I read the agenda, it's receiving a status report only on that part.
I understand we can't vote on it, but are we going to talk about?
Aren't we allowed?
We're allowed to talk about it because it's on the agenda.
We just can't vote.
Okay. Well, I don't have any questions. I have lots of comments.
Oh, well.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead. That's your question.
I look forward to when we have our comment section. So, all right. So, Greg.
Sorry. Excuse me.
That's all right. Greg, would we be able to restrict the use of those areas so that shuttles are not allowed to use them?
I think that would be through our regulation of parking on that area. Right now, it's designated loading and unloading. There are some state law issues that I'd want to make sure I could research and present to you about the ability of general users to drop off people in a red zone area and not actually park, because there's a distinction. There's no stopping zones, there's no parking zones, so we'd have to properly sign it and make sure that the laws apply to the shuttles.
But you believe we could, there is a way.
I think there is a way to do it.
There's a way to do that. Okay. Whatever that way is. Okay. The other question I had, Al, is I got the impression from talking to, I think it was Ben Fuller from the east side, who had spotted some of the trash being blown from the Caltrain tracks down onto Old County Road, that in his conversations with what I presume was the Caltrain contractor doing the cleanup, there's giving a message And then there's also setting performance standards that pretty much make it impossible to actually not do things that you don't want done. So when staff was reviewing this situation with Caltrain, are you comfortable that the rules of engagement are such that we have a reasonable chance that the rules will be followed and that stuff won't be blown in the interest of time?
I'd like to refer that question to Jay.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr.
Hi,
Mayor,
Jay.
members of council, Jay Walter, Public Works Director. And I think the answer to that question is yes. I think we have had engagement between the two agencies and the contractors involved to have an understanding that we need not be making problems for each other.
Okay.
As much scrutiny as there is for the area along the berm and the station, it's in all of our best interest to do that. So I believe that we have had those conversations, and we should be seeing better performance in that way.
And there is a process in place, even if only an informal one, to sort of check up on it from time to time, to make sure that both parties are abiding by what they agreed to?
And a good portion of that's going to be our own monitoring of the area that our contractor is supposed to be taking care of, and our interaction with him as well to find out if he's experiencing any problems that we'll bring to the attention of the JPB folks in this. So I do believe that we have a good direction going forward on it.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions from the dais, I'm going to take public comment. We have a number of speakers here. So first speaker is Dimitri Vandelos. The second is Ben Fuller. Dimitri, I understand you have a presentation to give us.
Yes, I was going to make it humorous, but I've actually lost my sense of humor after hearing this report. There was no community involvement whatsoever in this discussion of this. This is totally new. I was on the steering committee. This didn't exist before, and it astonishes me that this is a new thing that I've never seen or anyone in the GSC has seen. So let's get out of this. So, Samtrans has ignored our community concerns for months at a time. Trash, as you can see, is around the station. It's a daily occurrence. We get bottles. We have broken bottles. We have school kids. They need to cross the street. We have smaller items like bottles and paper. I mentioned oftentimes those bottles are broken. We have medium-sized items like plywood and lumber. We even have large furniture collectibles. You can see it. I'm not making it up. It's not photoshopped. We have overflowing containers. We have overflowing containers in the daytime and at nighttime. Next to the station and in the station, trash everywhere. Our community is so fed up that our seniors are out picking up after Samtrans, and let's be honest, the city, and the lack of cleanup that's going on. My wife and I were taking a walk lunchtime, and a woman down our street was picking up the trash. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She said, "I'm just so sick of it." Those were her words. "I'm just so sick of it. I'm cleaning up." So, I suppose with the slush funds that we're hearing about with Samtrans, this is the end result. It's an embarrassment and a shame that this continues. These are pictures that Mr. Fuller took at night after a power washing, and you can see that they're just spreading more garbage on our streets. Those two pictures are what happens after the cleaning, and so are these. In regards to the shuttles, they're now going down our streets even more, or they were. I believe they may have been moved to El Camino recently. So here's a Samtrans shuttle going on Bayport. This was sent by a resident this evening, right before the meeting. They cut across East San Carlos Avenue and are blocking. And here's someone in a car. I am astonished that we're even considering having shuttles on the east side, as I just heard city staff. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vandellis. Ben Fuller.
Well, it's great to see the slate of elected officials who've been reelected and the folks who are still here. Congratulations to all of you. I want to talk about Eastside Connect. It's going great. We got a lot of things happening, and it's an interesting term, Eastside Connect. There's two ways to look at it, though. There's connecting, which means finding better pedestrian solutions, dealing with the shuttles, dealing with the garbage, connecting the park, or there's sort of the lack of promise, which would just take out the NECT, and it's like an East Side Con. It's this incredible things going on where we really appreciate everything you guys are doing, but we're not really connected. So we're trying to kind of get up to the standard of the rest of the city. I think everyone can agree that it's been, going a lot better for the East Side in the last few years, thanks to all of you guys, and we really appreciate that. But we can also agree that before the 8 years that Bob and 12 years that Matt and the new guys, 4 to brand new, have been in, that the East Side really had a rough time, and we're trying to make up for a substandard living that we're all having over there. So you guys have all given me your personal prognosis on what's going to happen. I'm going to let you guys get to business. I want to thank you so much for everything you've already done. And we're really looking forward to getting all this resolved. And, yeah, this is a big surprise to see shuttles still on the east side, but maybe it's just one last futile attempt. We're hoping that's the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I neglected to indicate that Brian Fitzpatrick is the next speaker, and after Brian, Tim Hilborn.
Good evening. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Brian Fitzpatrick from Samtrans and Caltrain JPB. I kind of represent both, so I'll try to talk about who I'm talking about so that I don't confuse myself or you guys, probably myself more likely. So first of all, speaking on behalf of JPB, Caltrain, the entity that operates Caltrain, is the agency that is responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of the station. Pursuant to concerns from the GESC, and we do share their concerns that we want to see a clean station area, we have increased the cleaning of the stations on a regular basis. We provided the schedule to both your staff, or to your staff, so that's available for you. We've also availed ourselves to have ad hoc cleanup. So when things are noticed that need to be cleaned up in our station area, we will go out, we will send an extra crew out there. We've been doing that on a regular basis. It should also be noted that most of the complaints that you're seeing are not from the areas for which we are, responsible, and we feel that we're keeping that station clean and up to good standards. And if we are not, we welcome you to call us, and again, we'll send out people there to go address those concerns. So we do share those concerns with GESC. Secondly, from the Samtrans perspective with regard to shuttles, as Mr. Savay had noted, we have designed the transit center that's a part of the San Carlos Transit Village project, so that if that project does get built and the transit center is built, we will accommodate shuttles on the west side of the berm. So that will be taken care of should the council go in that direction. Now, from the JPB perspective, JPB is the entity that funds and operates some of the shuttles on that side. I wanted to point out a few things. The first one is that Mayor Olbert's thoughts that there needs to be an enforcement mechanism, I think, are very on target and on point. If the city of San Carlos says that they don't want shuttles operating on the east side, then every shuttle that is funded and operated by JPB will be rerouted to the west side, and those are scheduled shuttles that follow a designated route so that people know where to pick up and drop off from those shuttles. They know when to pick them up, where they're going to be picked up. Those are taken care of. So right now, to accommodate the construction of the East Side Connect project on a temporary basis, our shuttles, as of February 1st, have been moved over to the west side. Now, it should be noted that there
Mr. Fitzpatrick, I just want to mention to you, you're at about 2.5 minutes.
Okay, I will tie it up real quick. I want to mention to you that there are 2 shuttles that we know of, maybe more, that are not funded by JPB, not operated by us. What that basically means is that we can't control them, and you guys would need to have some kind of mechanism in able to be able to control them. I'd also like to note one more thing real quickly, if I could be indulged.
Yes, I appreciate it if you could wrap it up since you're now over 3 minutes.
Absolutely. If you notice the shuttles right there, shuttles, taxis, cars are all competing for that same shuttle area. One way of solving your problem is to keep shuttles from parking in that area. Another way of solving your problem is to keep cars and taxis from parking in that area, make it shuttle only, then you won't run into issues with shuttles pulling out in the street. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Kim Hilborn.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Thanks for letting us speak. My wife wouldn't let me wear my red shirt tonight because she said she needed to wash it. So, anyways, I'd like to first start off by saying that the traffic study that was done is extremely flawed. Dimitri brought up many points in his study, which you guys have on record, that proves beyond doubt that the shuttles do need to be moved, the safety issues, all of that stuff. So please look into that when you consider this. We definitely want the shuttles moved. I think that's been clearly stated by many people from the community to the west side. There's been proof after proof of pictures. Even I've been out there with you guys when we see shuttles that pull up and double park and create an extreme safety hazard. And I know safety has been a key word tonight for many things. So please consider that in moving the shuttles to the west side and the taxis as well. It should just be a drop-off point just for cars. Secondly, the thing that really didn't come up was the park and lieu fees. I urge City Council to please use 100% of the park and lieu fees from the San Carlos Transit Village project for Loyola Park. There's many various things that could be used for that, for the updates in the park, and we would really appreciate that, especially in consideration of the fact that the $1 million from PAMF went all to the West Side parks. And I know the whole community uses all the different parks, but we would really like to see those funds put towards Loyola Park as needed, because we're going to take the brunt of the impacts. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hilborn. Do you have any other speakers any other people who wish to speak on this item? All right. There was, in fact, there were a number of questions or issues raised by some of the presenters. One in particular that I wanted to run by staff just to get their reaction to. Mr. Vandelos's photo presentation showed a number of, my opinion, kind of disturbing levels of trash, both in terms of overflowing cans and I don't know what those things were, furniture that were propped up against, I guess looked like they're propped up against the depot. I'd just like to know if staff has any comment on those. Are they indicative of us having problems of keeping the place clean or what? I suppose the depot stuff is Mr. Fitzpatrick and the recycling bins are Mr. Walter. Okay, maybe not. Whoever it is, please step forward.
I guess I'll try to address a little bit. The recycling bins, essentially, that's a behavior problem with the depot cafe, as they would be getting rid of their stuff, to be able to get it into the bins so that the bin lids aren't up. I know that's one of the big issues, is when it's overflowing, then they end up with those things that can blow out of there. That's something that we could potentially have Recology pay them a visit and talk to them about the size of the containers and the way that they're being filled, and maybe try to help them in that regard. So that's something we could try to do. But as far as the large items that are deposited there at the train station, I mean, Brian mentioned that they have the occasional they'll come out and they'll clean up some of that extra junk that gets put out there. But that's a bad behavior from some person who just decided they didn't want to go down to Shoreway. So that's a tough one to regulate in that regard.
Except to react to and have somebody come out and clean it up. Right. Got it. Is our experience, follow-up question, is our experience that those calls, when either we make them or our residents make them, are responded to fairly quickly?
Well, I definitely will speak to the issue of when we have cleanups of that type of material in town. Recology is very cooperative in that regard. They help us out with that kind of thing. We often use the maintenance crew to take care of that. And I can only say by Mr. Fitzpatrick indicating that they have increased their level of response, that once it's called in, they'll get somebody out there to take care of it.
Okay. Mr. Fitzpatrick, did you want to add anything to that? You don't have to feel obligated to. Okay. Any other questions from the dais based on the comments?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a point. I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 11 o'clock.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I am.
You're opposed? Okay.
I'm with you next time.
Yeah, good.
All right. No other questions? Discussion? What? Pardon me. Nope, not discussion. We do have there is a resolution attached to this. So I know this is a tripartite item. So I will entertain a motion on that one item, and then we can discuss that and the other elements as well.
All right, Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt resolution number 2014-19,
19.
a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos requiring that the park development facility fees paid by the developer of the San Carlos Transit Village be used exclusively at Loriola Park.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. If my colleagues are okay with this, I'm going to ask that we'll see if there's any discussion on this item and then vote on it and then come back and discuss the remaining items, because I know that several of us have comments to make. Any discussion on this particular motion?
I have a question for fellow council members. I've talked to Mr. Fuller and other people from East Side about this before, and I know their concerns, and I agree with them, but a thought occurred to me, and it relates to something you said on the last issue, that we deal with policy up here, and we have to look at things broadly. Just like if we start putting in stop signs, then everybody's going to want a stop sign. If we agree to this, then there's potentially other developments that could go on in the city, say on the west side near some other park. And then the residents come corralling in here and say, well, we want all the money for this development to go to this park because it's in our neighborhood, it's near this development, so forth. And so I just raise that as a question. Do we have any concern about that? It crosses my mind. I have somewhat of a concern about it, although I can't think of geographically of a similar situation where we would have this kind of development to this extent and density and impacting a neighborhood in this way, and a park being nearby. The only other situation I can think of is it would be fair for, there is a park that's in San Carlos, but it's right on the border with Belmont, and I think it's, I forget what street that's on. Cedar Park. Yeah. You know, the neighborhood from there could say, hey, this is going to affect our park as well. And that's a rather, I mean, you compare that park to Loriola, which over the last 10 years, we've spent quite a bit of money on Loriola. It just becomes a fairness issue and an equity issue.
Certainly.
All right. I think the only thing I would say to that is that we have the prerogative to do whatever we want, and I think it's so obvious that this project has impacted this part of our community so directly that it makes, to me, it makes sense that we allocate the park and lieu fees to Loriola area. And I think you mentioned it with the Palo Alto Medical Facility, or maybe one of the speakers did. None of that money went to the east side, and I would argue that they were adversely impacted, or at least they were the most impacted community. We didn't give a dime to them then, so I don't know. Call it payback, but I think it's time that we set the record straight in a few cases. And I don't think it's precedent setting. I think we take each project as it comes along, and we see what is the best use for the money that comes out of whatever in lieu fees we get.
I actually, just to add to that, I think your point's very well taken, and I wrestled with that a little bit before tonight. To me, the policy thing that's lurking behind this is, in fact, the large footprint of dropping hundreds of people into an area where that is very likely, based on everything I know of, that's the park they're going to go to when they're thinking about going to parks. And so, to me, there's kind of a nexus between it. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. There is an element of the way the resolution itself is worded that doesn't describe it at that level. But I'm okay in this particular instance. Any other comments? In that case, we will call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. All right. Comments and discussion. Recall the remaining two items about the trash pickup and the shuttle drop-off. We are not taking action on tonight, but we can certainly, as I heard Greg say, we can be giving staff direction. Is that correct, Greg? Okay. Bob, I'd like to start with you, since you said you had a number of things you wanted to say.
I'll just concentrate on the shuttle side of it as opposed to the trash side of it. I think it'd be rare, or people might say it'd be rare, that Mr. Van Elst and I would ever agree on certain items, but tonight, and in past times I've also agreed, but tonight certainly is that thing. We do agree. I don't know where those two things came with, or up with. I appreciate, Mr. Fitzpatrick, that your shuttles have moved. As far as I'm concerned, they should never go back, but that's my opinion only. I read this letter from Caltrain, and I see folks say they have to leave work 20 to 30 minutes earlier to catch the regular train. If there was never a transit village, they'd still be leaving 20 to 30 minutes to catch the regular train. Maybe we should change the time of the train for them. I don't know. But I mean, I think it's sort of throwing it back to us, which we don't have. You know, I don't think it's us that has the problem here. Relative to the other shuttles that apparently aren't related to the JPB shuttles, I don't understand why they're over there. I would ask staff, and again, just me, and I don't know if the rest of the council concurs, that we paint it purple, we paint it yellow, we paint it aquamarine. I don't know. Put a sign. You know, nobody parks here, and you know, maybe it takes a police. And I hesitate to use Chief Rothfuss isn't here, and I hate to designate his staff to come out there, but maybe just a couple of times people might get the message. Go on the other side, end the conversation. I don't see that this is a huge legal thing, although government moves at a glacial pace. I mean, that's my opinion. That I think we should just eliminate those folks, and it's a KISS thing. Hey, drop off. It's a white zone. Boom, boom, and that's it. And I think, but I don't know, that we have the power to do that because it's a public street, and it will take a little bit of manpower to enforce it at the beginning. But I think folks will get the message pretty quick. And you know, so anyway, that's just my comments.
Fair enough. Other comments people may have?
I'll
Cameron?
just say that I second Bob's comments in their entirety.
Thanks.
Can you repeat them?
No, I don't want to repeat it.
Yes. Did you want?
I would have said the same thing.
The only thing that I would add to what Bob said is that Old County, you know, we just talked about a street that's a collector and looked at, you know, what are the standards and so forth. I'm sure if you looked at Old County Road and by whatever standards as being a street where you should have shuttles, I don't think it would pass muster. And so those shuttles just simply, I don't care about the schedules and all that sort of thing. That's Caltrans' problem, not ours. It belongs on the west side. And regarding the trash issue, I'll just say this. I live downtown. I walk past their building every day. And every day, in fact, I said to the guys one time, you guys are out here every day with the blowing and raking and cleaning. And I appreciate it being a neighbor. It's immaculate. It's the best kept sidewalks in town is around the Samtrans building. Just pick it up over there at the train station and try to be good neighbors that way, the same way.
Cloned it over there. Fifth, I guess, Bob's comments. I would actually, from my own perspective, go, if we needed to, one step further, following on my discussion with Greg. I would like to keep the drop-off area, you know, the sort of casual drop-off area over there, not for shuttles, but if you can't find a way forward that basically blocks the shuttles, I would be happy just to make that not a drop-off area too. It's more important to me that we move the shuttles to the west side than it is that we maintain that as a drop-off area. That may just be me. All right, with that, staff has what input they need from us. Okay, thank you. I think what we're going to do is we are going to take the item pulled off of the consent calendar, if my colleagues don't mind, just so that I think the last two items under new business are really just us and Mr. Maltby and Mr. Rubin, so we can perhaps let Christine get out early if we take up 6G now. Adopt a resolution approving.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would take umbrance a little bit with you because we have an architect sitting back there. He could become a council member now because he's learned so much, and he is.
Oh, I
actually item
apologize.
9B.
You're right. I did not know. Well.
Take D.
All right. No, that's fine. We will stick to the order of the agenda. Thank you for pointing that out, Matt. All right. That in turn brings us to consideration of adopting a resolution updating the city's customer service policy.
Mr. Mayor, could I apologize? Could you take D instead of C? Because that's where the architect is.
B. Or D. Oh, it's
instead of C?
Yeah,
That's where the architect, the customer service policy.
So you don't want me to follow the agenda?
No,
You want me
not at all.
Okay. All right.
We're trying to make.
Not at all. Not at all. Okay. All right. Well, never let it be said that we're not flexible. Then let's do 9D, consideration of adopting a resolution approving option 2 as the design concept for the council chamber ADA compliance project C9802. Hello, Matt.
Good evening again, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I would like to introduce you to
Feel free to drive.
our architect for the council chamber remodel. His name is Rob Wood, and he's with Nichols Booth Architecture. He's going to provide a presentation today in regards to the council chamber itself and the design options that we were focusing on.
And I'm sure it's going to be brief.
And it'll be very brief. So. Very brief and very entertaining.
My apologies for overlooking you before.
Not a problem. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you very much. My name is Rob Wood. I'm a senior vice president with Nichols Booth Architects, and we're very pleased to be working with you and your city on your renovation project. Understanding this has been a long night for you, I think I can keep this fairly quick. Good news is I don't have to work too hard to describe the chamber because you're actually in it. So we'll make things pretty quick and focused here. Overall goals for the project, very simply stated, to modernize and update the facility, improve the acoustics, lighting, provide an updated audiovisual equipment package, and a secure space that encourages human interaction, and hopefully accommodate some new finishes and furnishings in the process. The process to date has been relatively straightforward and robust, engaging the stakeholders, including the core team, executive team members, the city manager, and the council subcommittee to really evaluate and extract all the requirements and requests and help identify the best direction to move forward with the redesign of the council chambers. Site evaluation on the part of the architect, myself, and our consultants focus on the architectural accessibility, acoustics, audiovisual, and mechanical electrical systems for the room. The process is at that point then extended into developing some preliminary design options that were reviewed and comments engaged from all the stakeholders, including subcommittee members, and ultimately a final selection for a desired direction for the council chamber renovation to proceed. The next steps, quite simply after approval at this point, will be to proceed into a detailed design of the space as it's currently configured in a schematic phase, leading to then a development of a permit and bid package that would then be approved for public bid and construction of the project. The existing plan, as you can see, as you're sitting in the space, is simply referenced here in your package to help you understand the orientation of the new space.
Rob, pardon me for interrupting, but my sense is that if you go through every single slide in here.
I'm going to make it really quick because I think the back two-thirds of this we can just kind of move right through.
Perfect.
Thank you. Silver level really involves major upgrades to the space that are required. These are not nice to haves, these are must haves from the perspective of all the stakeholders. Inspiration images, as we kind of move through this, are being used to kind of engage those stakeholders and ultimately getting to the meat of the situation, which is the proposed plan. So the orientation of the room really is limited in terms of where to locate the dais, and the proposal as it stands now, as you can see, is to essentially take your dais as you sit at it now and start to shift it against the south wall. What this does is it provides a better orientation within the room to reduce the depth of the seating from the back of the room to the dais, as well as providing an area to the left of the dais on the plan that could be used to engage, to have the city manager, the city attorney, and other staff members sit. This is a schematic diagram, so keep in mind that further refinements would be made if approved to ensure that all the requirements in terms of seating capacity and distances and orientation would be able to be accommodated. On the far left-hand side, from an accessibility standpoint, would incorporate a new ADA-compliant ramp. The height of the dais would actually be lower than what you are currently sitting in, based on, again, feedback from representatives and stakeholders. And the chairs essentially would be, rather than fixed, be movable chairs. And the new counts of the seats, as shown, would be approximately 119 seats versus the 98 that are currently present. But by taking out seats in the center aisle would provide additional circulation and allow a higher seating capacity on an as-needed basis. In addition, in the section that you see to the right of the plan, the ceiling plane would be brought down substantially. The dashed line that you see at the top of that diagram indicates the existing ceiling, and then the hard lines are actually the ceiling position that we would be proposing. In reviewing this with our acoustic engineer as well as our AV engineer, this provided certainly an aesthetic improvement, in our opinion, as well as acoustic improvements without sacrificing sight lines for the space. In addition, the proposed plan for the ceiling incorporates a similar design in that we would be bringing a perimeter soffit down along the perimeter of the space, but also incorporating acoustic ceiling panels in the ceiling that address both new lighting and acoustics. The remainder, to just very quickly describe, we're in this package breaking things into a silver, gold, and platinum level in an effort to identify ways in which we can provide alternate pricing in our package to try and make sure that we get all the must-have elements of this design in under the budget that's been established, while still providing a menu of options that might be able to be engaged on a limited basis, and if funds allow, a complete package including all of the potential design options that are available to this proposed design package. I encourage you to quickly glance through, and if you have any questions, I recognize that we're running late, so are there any questions that I could answer for you at this point?
Ron?
I have one. In looking at the option 2,
yes,
what is proposed, it looked like the projector would be on that wall. Excuse me, not the projector, but the screen.
So one of the options is to actually put a third screen. So the intent would be for 2 primary screens to be located behind you as well, and then the council members and staff would actually have small monitors in front of them to be seeing any presentation. The third monitor on the side is a gold option that would then provide additional visibility to members of the public on the side that might be a little too far away.
My concern was that we have screens behind us.
Yes, and so
wouldn't have to look to the left.
Correct. So the intent is to provide supplementary screens in front of you at the dais.
Okay, thank you.
And the platinum option is they give everybody when they walk in Google Glass. You just sit there.
Gold, silver, platinum. I thought we were talking about healthcare for a minute.
Other questions?
Do we have to decide on gold, silver, or platinum tonight?
No. The intent would be to simply provide approval for the direction, and we would work with the staff to develop a bid package that would incorporate those elements.
It seems like when we met, and maybe I misunderstood, that we were looking at sidewall acoustics too.
Yes, one of the options
But
incorporates
it's only
that.
in the gold plan, it's not in the silver plan. So can we mix and match?
Absolutely. The intent is, again, to incorporate, add alternate pricing elements within the bid package. And so if the city and council should decide to proceed with certain aspects of platinum, but not elements of the gold, that can certainly be accommodated.
But that'll be something a subcommittee will work on, right? To
Right.
define? Okay. Which is good. We have, a developer and a cheapskate. Just kidding.
I'm frugal.
I never said you weren't. I just said you're a developer. I did have 2 quick questions. One is, how much lower is the dais? Or is that also subject to?
At this point, based on feedback and review of dioceses in similar jurisdictions, we're proposing actually a single step, so about 7 to 12 inches. So enough to raise it, but not as nearly as much as it is currently.
Right now.
Yes, I thought we were going to several steps up. The other question I had is it just quickly glancing at the various options. It looks like the seating is not fixed seating; it's flexible.
Right.
Correct.
I don't remember. I actually liked the seating in the Belmont City Council chambers. Is that's flexible?
Yeah, that's flexible.
Oh, I didn't even realize
Yeah,
that.
it's flexible.
They're
As
nice
is Redwood
flexible.
City. As is Redwood City. Both
Okay,
of them.
all right.
Those are the basis for the ones that we looked at.
Okay, because those are pretty nice. Any other questions? In that case, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt a resolution. I guess I better get the resolution number here. Resolution number 2014-20.
20.
Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving option 2 as the design concept for the council chamber ADA compliance project C9802.
Is there a second?
A second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we will call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Obert?
Yes. And with that,
Thank you for.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Me again.
We will move to. Yes, let's take 6G. Christine, you're finally up again, and hopefully you won't have to sit back down. Because I know those old chairs are hard to get in and out of. Adopt a resolution approving a professional services agreement with Ross Drellis Kusenberry Architecture, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $234,500 to scope, design, create construction documents, and provide support for the Adult Community Center remodel project C9322.
Well, you just covered my presentation. Kristen Bowen, Parks and Recreation Director. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council.
Through the chair, one question. Why did staff pull this off?
I can actually cut to the chase on that.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay, sorry.
In fact, in the interest of time, Christine, if you'll bear with me a second, I had asked that we address this separately because to me, there's a bigger issue here of do we want to actually go ahead with the proposed remodeling, or do we want to perhaps direct staff to go back and bring forward a proposal that does as little as needs to be done, with the idea being that we would take a bigger picture look at doing a more comprehensive community facility, which has been something that we have batted around informally at various strategic planning meetings on and off. And if there's no interest in doing that on the diocese part, then we can simply jump directly to voting on this, but that was the discussion I wanted to have.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's exactly what I was thinking.
Right. So does everybody, I know it's late, I may not have been clear, does everybody understand the issue I was bringing up?
Is there a minimal level? Is this the minimal level? The
No, I think
230?
if I can jump in here, I think what the council would be doing tonight is simply telling staff that you'd like to defer this project for now, as it's been envisioned, and bring back the discussion in as short order as possible on the larger concept that we had talked about in the past for the site, so that you can flesh that out a little bit more before we start to spend money on this project.
With the addendum is that if staff feels there are certain things that absolutely have to be done to the existing facility for a safety point of view, then bring those back.
Correct. We break those out as smaller maintenance type projects and bring those back.
I have
in
a
short
question.
Yes.
I've been around for a while, but do I remember a presentation to the council on a full scope of things that are being planned and envisioned to do to this building? I remember the roof.
We did the roof a couple years ago.
Yeah.
The proposed scope or planning is contained in your written materials tonight. It's basically to redesign the building for better accessibility, renovate the interior, FFEs, fixtures, furniture, equipment, heating, ventilation, circulation, the kitchen. Better functionality of the existing spaces is what we're really getting at. I don't know if you were at the crab feed last night, but you would have noticed 220 participants there eating lots of crab, and the rooms are choppy and small versus what we could do and open up the facility.
Just to be clear, I was not trying to shut off discussion of approving this, if that's the direction we're going to go in. I was just saying, is this the direction we want to go in? If we want to go in that direction, then we definitely, can hear staff's presentation. But if we want to have a broader discussion, that's not really what they're prepared to talk about tonight.
I guess I would go more your route, just because I was going to pull this if nobody else did. I just don't feel entirely comfortable with a not to exceed 234.5 for all this work. It seems a bit steep.
Okay. Okay, that's certainly fair. I mean, that's different from the reason I pulled it.
What's the brakes on it, at least? Yeah.
Well, I agree, because I'd have the concept of that's just for the design, and then $1.5 million for a huge remodel. And if, that $1.7 million might be able to
make a down payment on something bigger.
Might,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm, excuse me, definitely supportive of deferring this and talking about other potential projects that are possible for the site.
Is that clear enough direction?
But we need, in case there's any safety or have-to-haves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any have-to-haves we'll bring back for you, on the next couple
A smaller
agendas.
scope, right.
As soon as we can get them ready, and we will prepare a larger conceptual discussion, which we've had a small version of that in the past, but we'll get that ready for you and bring it back.
And I think in fairness to Matt's comment, whenever we bring stuff back, we ought to be prepared to discuss the basis of why, the design fees. You were raising a question about the size of the design fees relative to the scale of the project.
Sure.
So, all right. Thank you, Christine. That brings us to 9C, consideration of adopting a resolution updating the city's customer service policy. And again, in the interest of time, you may recall this was something that I had asked that the council discuss because there were a couple of elements that I had wanted to propose, including in this. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the material in writing to share with you folks, so we could either table this and bring it back at a future meeting, have a conceptual discussion now and give direction to staff, or simply proceed with the presentation. What is your pleasure, given that it's 10:50? One.
If there's an option to table it, I'd take it. But
It is-
if it's something that's short in 5 minutes.
It seemed like, based on the pre-read, it seemed a pretty reasonable change and relatively minor. So, from my perspective.
I would be, if you want, I would be happy to just tell you the four things that I was thinking of including.
And through that, since there are four things, I think we should table it. Because at 11 o'clock, I'm not voting to stay here any longer. So, and by the time you talk and the time four things, well, we will use that time.
Well, we may have Crystal talk.
Through the mayor, if I may, I think we could probably, I think we've got it, we will skip the staff presentation on this. I have had an opportunity to discuss with the mayor his 4 points. They're pretty straightforward. I don't have any problem seeing those included in the policy. So I don't know if their council members have other ideas, but it might be quick if the mayor could just describe those, including the additions that we've outlined in the staff report. We might be able to get through this in 5 minutes.
Or what we could do is, based on your comments, we could have staff include those elements that I had shared with you before and bring it back at the next meeting.
Happy to do that as well.
And that way people have a chance to read it ahead of time rather than try and do it on the fly. Is that okay?
Yes.
If you could break out the four items that are different than this, that would be, if you're going to include it in the policy, I don't know what you're doing.
We'll highlight it in the staff report when we
Four items?
bring it back.
Okay.
Just like we did the other recommended staff items.
Make sure it has my initials on it so he knows which ones to object to.
Yeah, you don't get any sort of failure to be here.
That's right.
I'm objecting.
So, all right, I believe with that we are done and adjourned.